Clara's ribs cracked under Jeremiah's boot, the sound echoing through the cabin like breaking branches. "Please?" she gasped, blood pooling in her mouth. "They're already broken." Her brother, once her protector, now her tormentor, laughed a sound darker than the Wyoming night pressing against the windows. This is where our story begins, in the ruins of family love turned to poison. Stay with me until the end, friends, and drop a comment about where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far Clara's story travels tonight. The morning light filtered through the grimy cabin window, casting long shadows across the rough wooden floor where Clara Hendricks lay motionless. Her breathing came in shallow, painful gasps, each intake of air a reminder of the violence that had shattered her body the night before. At 23, she had the weathered look of someone who'd lived twice that long, her once bright blue eyes now dulled by years of systematic cruelty. Jeremiah's snores rumbled from the back room, the stench of whiskey and sweat permeating the small space they'd called home for the past 7 years. 7 years since their parents died in that wagon accident. 7 years since Jeremiah promised with tears in his eyes that he'd take care of his little sister. 7 years of watching that promise rot, like meat left too long in the sun. Clara tried to push herself up, wincing as fire shot through her ribcage. Her fingers found the tender spots along her side, mapping the geography of pain that had become as familiar as her own name. 3 ribs, maybe 4 this time. The doctor in town, if she could even get to town, would shake his head. Again clean her up, send her back. Everyone knew what happened in the Hendricks cabin. No one did anything about it. "You awake in there?" Jeremiah's voice boomed from the doorway, making Clara flinch despite herself. He stood there, all 6 feet 3 inches of him, his frame filling the doorway like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. His dark hair hung greasy and unkempt around a face that might have been handsome once before the drink, and the rage carved permanent lines of cruelty into his features. "Yes," Clara whispered, not trusting her voice to carry more weight than that single word. "Good. Get breakfast started. The boys are coming over later for cards." He scratched his beard, eyeing her crumpled form with the casual indifference of someone observing furniture. "And clean yourself up. You look like hell." The irony of his words might have made her laugh once. Now she simply nodded, waiting until his heavy footsteps retreated before attempting to stand. The world tilted dangerously as she pulled herself upright, using the wall for support. Each movement was calculated, measured against the threshold of pain she could endure without crying out. Crying out only made things worse. In the small mirror hanging crooked by the wash basin, Clara caught sight of herself. Purple bruises bloomed across her left cheekbone like violent wildflowers. Her lip was split swollen, but it was her eyes that held her attention somewhere in those depths beneath layers of exhaustion and defeat. Something flickered. Not quite hope, but not quite surrender either. Something in between waiting. The kitchen was sparse, a wood stove, a table scarred by years of abuse, 2 chairs that wobbled on uneven legs. Clara moved through the familiar motions of starting breakfast, her body operating on muscle memory, while her mind drifted elsewhere. She thought of their mother, Clara Hendricks, who used to hum while she cooked, filling the same kitchen with warmth and laughter. She thought of their father, strong and gentle, who taught Jeremiah to ride and shoot and be a man. What would they think if they could see their children now? "Your mother spoiled you," Jeremiah often said when the whiskey made him philosophical. "Made you soft, useless. Can't even find a husband to take you off my hands." The truth was simpler and crueler. Jeremiah had run off every suitor who'd shown interest. Tom Morrison, the banker's son, had come calling 3 times before Jeremiah broke his nose and threatened worse if he returned. Samuel Chen, whose family ran the general store, lasted 2 visits before Jeremiah's threats sent him packing. After that, word spread. Clara Hendricks was off-limits property of her brother, a bird in a cage with broken wings. The bacon sizzled in the pan, its aroma mixing with the perpetual smell of tobacco and whiskey that clung to everything in the cabin. Clara's hands moved automatically, turned the bacon, cracked the eggs, sliced the bread. Behind her, she heard Jeremiah's boots on the floor, felt his presence like a weight pressing down on the room. "You know why I have to discipline you, don't you?" His voice was different now, that dangerous tone that preceded either violence or something worse, his twisted version of affection. It's because I care. Because someone has to keep you in line. The world's harsh, Clara. Harsh and unforgiving. I'm preparing you for it. Clara said nothing. She'd learned that silence was often the safest response, that words could be twisted into weapons and turned against her. She placed the plate in front of him, careful not to meet his eyes, careful to keep her movements submissive and unthreatening. Look at me when I'm talking to you. He snapped his hand, shooting out to grab her wrist. His fingers pressed into the bruises already there, making her gasp. You think you're too good to look at me after everything I've done for you? No, Clara managed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I'm sorry. His eyes searched hers, looking for defiance, for any excuse to unleash the rage that always simmered just beneath the surface. Finding nothing, he released her wrist with a disgusted sound. Pathetic, he muttered, turning his attention to the food. Can't even cook eggs properly. They're runny. Claire retreated to the corner of the kitchen, making herself small, invisible. This was the dance they performed daily. His provocations, her submissions, the constant negotiation of violence deferred or delivered. She watched him eat, noting the tremor in his hands that meant he needed a drink, the red-rimmed eyes that suggested he'd been up late again, losing money at cards he didn't have. A knock at the door interrupted the tense quiet. Jeremiah's head snapped up to his hand, instinctively moving to the pistol he kept on his belt. Who is it? He barked. It's Matthews, came the reply. Got that thing you asked about? Jeremiah relaxed slightly, though his hand remained on his weapon. Bill Matthews was one of his drinking companions, a man cut from the same rough cloth, hard-living, quick to anger, treating women like possessions to be used and discarded. Come in, Jeremiah called. And Matthews entered, bringing with him the smell of horse and leather, and something else, opportunity maybe, though Clara couldn't say why that word came to mind. Matthews was shorter than Jeremiah, but broader, with the build of someone who'd spent years breaking horses and breaking heads with equal enthusiasm. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Clara for a moment too long before turning to Jeremiah. Got word from the Garrison boys, Matthews said, lowering his voice. That cattle drive we talked about. They're looking for men. Good money in it. 3 months, maybe 4 driving beef up to Montana. Jeremiah's eyes lit up with interest. How much what? $100 a man plus bonuses if we make good time. Clara's heart began to race. 3 months. 3 months without Jeremiah. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. She kept her face carefully neutral, continuing to clean the dishes as if she hadn't heard. When? Jeremiah asked. Week from Tuesday. But here's the thing. Matthews glanced at Clara again. They want men who can commit to the full drive. No coming back for visits, no distractions. Jeremiah stood pacing now, his breakfast forgotten. Clara could see him calculating, weighing the money against his need to control, to possess. $100 was more than he'd see in 6 months of odd jobs and gambling. What about, he gestured vaguely at Clara. Mrs. Patterson's looking for help at the boarding house, Matthews offered. Room and board plus a small wage. Could set your sister up there while you're gone. No. The word came out sharp, final. She stays here. She can manage on her own for a few months. Matthews shrugged. Your choice, but the offer stands. Garrison wants an answer by Friday. After Matthews left, Jeremiah turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. You heard? Yes. You'll be fine here alone. Stock up on supplies before I go. And don't get any ideas about running off. This is your home. I'm your family. You remember that. Clara nodded, her mind already racing. 3 months alone. 3 months to breathe, to think, to maybe even heal. It was more freedom than she'd had in years, even if it came with invisible chains. The rest of the day passed in typical fashion. Jeremiah's card-playing friends arrived in the afternoon, rough men who tracked mud through the cabin and leered at Clara when they thought Jeremiah wasn't looking. She served them whiskey and beer, emptied their ashtrays, ignored their crude jokes and cruder suggestions. Your sister's looking prettier every day, Hendricks. One of them, a gap-toothed man named Cole, said with a leer. When you gonna let one of us court her proper? When hell freezes over. Jeremiah replied, his tone light but his eyes hard. Anyone touches her answers to me. Just saying seems a waste, a pretty thing like that going unappreciated. The temperature in the room dropped. Jeremiah's hand moved to his pistol. You appreciating something that belongs to me, Cole? No, no, Cole backpedaled quickly. Just making conversation. Make it about something else. Clara retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she washed glasses. This was always the worst part, not the direct violence from Jeremiah, but the constant threat of it from others, with Jeremiah playing the role of protector and tormentor simultaneously. She was his to hurt, his to save, his to control completely. As evening fell and the card players finally departed, Jeremiah's mood had soured. He'd lost money again, she could tell by the way he slammed the door, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched. Clara tried to make herself scarce, but in a cabin this small, there was nowhere to truly hide. "You were flirting with Cole," he accused, cornering her by the stove. "I wasn't." His backhand caught her across the face, snapping her head to the side. "Don't lie to me. I saw how you looked at him." Clara tasted blood. "I didn't look at him at all. I kept my eyes down like you told me."
"Like I told you," he mimicked in a high mocking voice. "You think following orders makes you good. You think it makes up for what you are." She knew better than to ask what she was. She'd heard it all before, burden curse reminder of everything he'd lost, everything he'd been forced to sacrifice. The litany of her sins was long and ever-changing, shaped by his moods and the level of whiskey in his blood. That night, as Clara lay on her thin mattress in the corner of the main room, Jeremiah had the only bedroom. She stared at the ceiling and thought about broken ribs. Not just the ones currently sending shoots of pain through her body, but the metaphorical ones. The ribs that were supposed to protect her heart, her spirit, her sense of self. Those had been broken so long ago she couldn't remember what it felt like to breathe without pain. But Matthew's words echoed in her mind. 3 months, maybe 4. Outside, an owl called its cry, cutting through the night. Clara had read once in one of their mother's books before Jeremiah burned them all that owls were symbols of change, of death and rebirth. She wondered if this was her owl calling to her, telling her that change was coming, whether she was ready or not. The next morning brought rain, heavy and relentless, turning the dirt paths to mud and trapping everyone indoors. Jeremiah's mood was black as the clouds overhead. He prowled the cabin like a caged animal, finding fault with everything. The coffee was too weak, the fire too smoky, Clara's presence too irritating. "Can't even keep a proper house," he muttered, running his finger along a shelf and examining the dust. "What use are you?" Clara remained silent, having learned that defending herself only escalated things. She went about her chores, each movement careful and deliberate, trying not to draw attention. "I asked you a question." His voice was closer now, right behind her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'll do better." "You'll do better," he repeated mockingly. "You've been saying that for 7 years. When does better actually arrive, Clara?" She turned to face him, keeping her eyes downcast. "I don't know." "You don't know." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look up. "Maybe you need another lesson in trying harder." The fear that shot through her was immediate and familiar. "Please, Jeremiah, your ribs are already broken." He laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. "Everything about you is already broken, sister. I'm just finishing the job." But something in Clara's chest, something small and hidden, refused to accept this. Even as her body tensed for the coming violence, that tiny ember of defiance flickered. She thought of the owl of 3 months of freedom, of the girl she used to be before all of this. "Actually," Jeremiah said, releasing her roughly, "I have business in town. The Garrison boys want to discuss the drive." He grabbed his coat and hat. "I'll be back late. Have supper ready." After he left, Clara stood in the sudden silence of the cabin, hardly daring to believe it. Alone. She was alone. She moved to the window, watching his figure disappear into the rain, then sank into a chair, her body shaking with relief and something else possibility. She thought of their parents again, tried to summon clearer memories of the time before. Her mother teaching her to read her father's gentle hands, showing her how to gentle a spooked horse. Jeremiah had been different then, too protective in a way that didn't hurt, caring in a way that didn't demand payment in pain. The change had been gradual at first after their parents died. A harsh word here, a grabbed arm there. Then came the first real blow. She'd accidentally burned supper, and he'd slapped her.
He'd apologized after Clyde even sworn it would never happen again. But it did. Again and again, each time worse than the last, each time with less remorse, until violence became their only language. Clara stood moving on instinct to the loose floorboard near the stove. Beneath it was her secret, her rebellion, a small cloth bag containing the few coins she'd managed to hide over the years, taken from Jeremiah's pockets when he was passed out drunk. $17.43. Not enough to get far, but enough to dream on. She added another quarter she'd found that morning, then carefully replaced the board. Someday, she told herself, someday she'd have enough. Someday she'd be brave enough. Someday the broken ribs would heal, and she'd run fast and far enough that he'd never find her. The rain continued through the afternoon, drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. Clara used the solitude to tend to her injuries as best she could, wrapping her ribs with strips of cloth, applying cold compresses to the worst of the bruises. In the cracked mirror, she studied her face, trying to see past the damage to the person underneath. Who was Clara Hendricks when she wasn't being hit? Who was she when fear wasn't her constant companion? She couldn't remember, but she thought maybe, just maybe, she could learn again. As evening approached and the rain finally began to ease, Clara started preparing supper. She heard horses outside, multiple sets of hoofbeats, and her heart sank. Jeremiah must have brought friends back with him. She quickly set extra places, pulled out more food, tried to prepare herself for another night of serving drunk men and dodging their attention. But when the door opened, Jeremiah was alone. Though his expression was strange, excited and agitated simultaneously. "It's done," he announced, water dripping from his coat. "I leave Tuesday, 3 months driving cattle to Montana." He pulled out a bottle of whiskey already half empty from his celebrating in town. "This is going to change everything, Clara. Come back with enough money to really make something of this place. Maybe even find you a husband, someone who'll take you off my hands proper." Clara served him supper, listening to him ramble about the drive, about the money, about his plans. She noticed he never mentioned what she would do while he was gone, how she would survive. In his mind, she was furniture, something that would simply remain in place until he returned to use it again. "Matthew says the Garrison boys are tough but fair," Jeremiah continued, whiskey slurring his words slightly. "Says a man can make his fortune on a drive like this if he's smart about it." Clara wanted to ask if he was taking Matthews with him, but didn't dare. Any question could be interpreted as criticism, any interest as suspicion. "You'll need supplies while I'm gone," he said finally, as if just remembering she was a living being who required food. "I'll leave you some money. Make it last. And don't go getting ideas about credit at the store. I don't want to come back to debts." "Yes, Jeremiah." He studied her, his eyes narrowing. "You seem different tonight." Clara's pulse quickened. "I'm just tired." "Tired." He stood swaying slightly. "You don't know what tired is. Try working cattle for 16 hours a day. Try dealing with men who'd as soon shoot you as look at you. Try carrying the weight of this family on your shoulders." The irony of his words, him complaining about carrying weight while she stood there with broken ribs from his boot, might have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Clara simply nodded, agreeing with whatever narrative he needed to tell himself. That night, Jeremiah's snores were louder than usual, the whiskey pulling him deep into unconsciousness. Clara lay awake, counting the days until Tuesday, planning what she would do with her time alone. She could heal. She could breathe. She could remember what it felt like to exist without fear. But even as she planned, a darker thought crept in. What if the drive changed nothing? What if he came back worse, hardened by months on the trail, more violent from the rough company? What if this brief respite only made the return to captivity more unbearable? She pushed the thought away. She couldn't think that far ahead. She had to focus on the immediate future, on the gift of 3 months without fists and boots and casual cruelty. Sunday arrived gray and humid, the air thick with the promise of more rain. Jeremiah spent the day preparing for the drive, cleaning his guns, mending his gear, making lists of things he needed from town. He was almost manic in his energy, more animated than Clara had seen him in years. "This is it," he kept saying. "This is our chance to change things." Clara wanted to ask what exactly would change. Would he stop hitting her? Would he let her have friends? Maybe even a life of her own? But she knew better. The only thing that would change would be the amount of money he had to gamble away. Monday brought a trip to town for supplies. Jeremiah made Clara come with him partly to carry packages, but mostly she suspected to remind the townspeople that she belonged to him. They visited the general store, the feed store, the blacksmith. At each stop, people greeted them with careful politeness, their eyes sliding away from Clara's bruised face, their expressions carefully neutral. Only Mrs. Chen at the general store showed any sign of concern, her hand briefly touching Clara's as she handed over a package. "If you need anything while your brother's away," she said quietly, "you come see me." Jeremiah's hand clamped down on Clara's shoulder. "She won't need anything. Will you, Clara?" "No," Clara replied, even as her eyes tried to thank Mrs. Chen for the kindness. That evening, their last together for months, Jeremiah was almost gentle. He didn't hit her, didn't yell. He even helped clear the dishes after supper, a gesture so unusual that Clara didn't know how to respond. "I know I'm hard on you sometimes," he said, not quite looking at her. "But it's for your own good. The world's not kind to women alone. You need to be strong." Clara wanted to scream that his version of making her strong was killing her, slowly breaking her down piece by piece until there would be nothing left to be strong with. Instead, she said, "I understand." "Good." He seemed relieved, as if her words absolved him of 7 years of brutality. "I'll leave at dawn. There's $50 in the jar on the shelf. That should last you 3 months if you're careful." $50 for 3 months. Clara did quick math. It would be tight, but manageable. And with her hidden savings, she might actually have options. That night she barely slept. Every time she dozed off, she'd wake with a start, afraid she'd dreamed the whole thing that Jeremiah wasn't really leaving. But when dawn broke, he was up and moving, gathering his things with purposeful efficiency. "Remember," he said as he stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the rising sun, "this is your home. I'm your family. Don't forget that while I'm gone." "I won't forget," Clara said, and meant it. She wouldn't forget any of it, the pain, the fear, the gradual erosion of her spirit. She'd remember it all and use it as fuel for whatever came next. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to read her thoughts. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Clara stood in the doorway, watching him mount his horse and ride off, watching until he was nothing but a speck on the horizon, then nothing at all. Only then did she allow herself to breathe, really breathe, despite the pain in her ribs. The air tasted different somehow, sweeter, full of possibility. She was alone. For the first time in 7 years, she was truly alone. Clara walked back into the cabin, seeing it with new eyes. Without Jeremiah's presence, it seemed smaller but also less oppressive. The shadows weren't as dark, the corners not as threatening. She moved through the space, touching things she normally avoided. His chair, his books, the rifle mounted on the wall that she was never allowed to handle. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She laughed. It started as a small sound, almost a hiccup, then grew into something fuller, slightly hysterical, but real. She laughed until her ribs protested, until tears streamed down her face, until she had to sit down from the sheer relief of it all. 3 months. She had 3 months to figure out who Clara Hendricks was when she wasn't being broken. 3 months to heal, to plan, to dream. 3 months to water that tiny ember in her chest and see if it could grow into something more, maybe even into the strength to never let herself be broken again. The sun climbed higher, streaming through the windows, and Clara began to clean. Not because she had to, not because she feared punishment if she didn't, but because she wanted to. She wanted to scrub away the smell of whiskey and violence, wanted to make this space hers, even if only temporarily. As she worked, she hummed tentatively at first, then with more confidence. It was one of her mother's songs, something about birds and freedom and mountains. She couldn't remember all the words, but the melody came back to her note by note, like a friend returning from a long journey. By midday, the cabin looked different. Cleaner, yes, but also lighter somehow. Clara had opened all the windows, letting in fresh air and the sounds of the world outside, birds singing, wind in the trees. Life happening beyond these walls. She made herself a simple lunch and ate it at the table, not standing in the corner as she usually did. She used the good plate, the one they saved, for company. She sat in Jeremiah's chair. Each small act of rebellion felt momentous, each choice her own to make. In the afternoon, she counted the money Jeremiah had left, then carefully hid half of it with her secret savings. She wouldn't spend it all, would save what she could. Because now, with 3 months stretching ahead of her, a plan was forming. A dangerous plan, maybe an impossible one, but a plan nonetheless. She would use this time to get stronger. Not in Jeremiah's way, through pain and breaking, but in her own way. She would heal her body, feed it properly, let it remember what it felt like to move without fear. She would practice with the rifle when no one was around to see. She would read the few books Jeremiah had missed burning, educate herself, prepare. And when he came back, if things returned to the way they were, when things returned to the way they were, because Clara had no illusions about Jeremiah changing, she would be ready. Ready to run, ready to fight, ready to do whatever it took to never be broken again. The owl called again that night, closer this time, as if approving of her plans. Clara stood on the porch, looking up at the stars, breathing in the cool night air. Her ribs still hurt, would hurt for weeks probably, but the pain felt different now. It wasn't the pain of defeat, but the pain of transformation, like growing pains, but for her soul. "My ribs are already broken," she said to the darkness, repeating the words she'd spoken to Jeremiah. But now they meant something different. They meant she had survived the worst he could do. They meant she had nothing left to lose. They meant she was free to become something new, something unbreakable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She would need to go to town for supplies, face the pitying looks and careful distances of people who knew her story but did nothing to change it. She would need to maintain the fiction that everything was fine, that she was just waiting patiently for her brother's return. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Clara Hendricks went to sleep without fear. She dreams of her mother's songs, her father's gentle hands, and a version of herself that stood tall and unafraid. She dreams of ribs that were broken, but healing of a spirit that was crushed, but rising of a woman who would never again whisper please to someone who enjoyed her pain. The first week of Jeremiah's absence passed in a blur of discovery. Clara found herself jumping at shadows, expecting him to burst through the door at any moment, angry that she'd believed he was really gone. But as each day passed without his return, she began to relax incrementally, her body slowly releasing 7 years of constant tension. She established new routines, ones that belonged to her alone. She woke with the sun, not because she had to start breakfast for Jeremiah, but because she wanted to see the morning light paint the mountains gold. She ate when she was hungry, not on his schedule. She went to bed when she was tired, not when he passed out, and she could finally rest without fear of being woken by his demands. The trip to town she dreaded turned out to be less ordeal than expected. Mrs. Chen at the general store was warm and helpful, slipping an extra bit of flour into Clara's order with a conspiratorial wink. Even some of the men who usually ignored her completely offered brief nods of acknowledgement, as if Jeremiah's absence had made her visible as a person rather than just his property. "Heard your brother joined the Garrison Drive," Mr. Patterson from the boarding house said as Clara passed. "That's rough work. Takes a particular kind of man." Clara merely nodded, unsure how to respond to casual conversation after years of silence. "If you need anything while he's gone," Patterson continued, "my wife's always looking for help with the washing. Pays fair." The offer was tempting. Extra money would help her plans considerably, but Clara knew Jeremiah had eyes in town, people who would report back to him when he returned. She couldn't risk word getting back that she'd been working. Been independent, been anything other than obediently waiting for his return. "Thank you," she said carefully, "but I'm managing fine." Patterson nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "Offer stands if things change." Back at the cabin, Clara unpacked her supplies and made a decision. She would take each day as it came, but she would also prepare. She took down the rifle from the wall, the weight of it unfamiliar in her hands. Jeremiah had forbidden her from touching it, said women had no business with weapons. She carried it outside along with a box of ammunition she'd found in his room. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was young before everything went wrong. The memory was faint, but there his patient voice, his steady hands guiding hers, the satisfaction of hitting the target. Her first shots were disasters, missing the tree she'd aimed at by several feet. Her arms shook, whether from weakness or nervousness she couldn't tell. But she kept trying, adjusting her stance, her grip remembering her father's instructions piece by piece. By the end of the afternoon, she was hitting the tree more often than not. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's kick, but it was a good ache, an earned ache. She was doing something, becoming something rather than just enduring. That evening, as she cleaned the rifle and returned it to its place, Clara felt a shift inside herself. It was small, subtle, but unmistakable. She wasn't just surviving Jeremiah's absence, she was using it. Every day without him was a day she grew stronger, more capable, more herself. The second week brought unexpected visitors. Clara was tending the small garden behind the cabin, another thing Jeremiah had forbidden her from doing, claiming she'd just kill everything she touched when she heard horses approaching. Her heart raced as she grabbed the rifle, then relaxed slightly when she saw it was Mrs. Patterson and another woman she didn't recognize. "Miss Hendricks," Mrs. Patterson called out. "I hope we're not intruding." Clara lowered the rifle, embarrassed to be caught with it. "Not at all. Please come in." The women dismounted, and Mrs. Patterson introduced her companion. "This is Mrs. Sarah Garrett. She and her husband have the ranch about 10 miles north. She's new to the area." Sarah Garrett was perhaps 35, with kind eyes and prematurely gray streaks in her dark hair. She had the weathered look of someone who worked hard but hadn't been broken by it, a strength that seemed to come from within rather than from surviving external forces. "Pleased to meet you," Sarah said, her voice warm. "Martha's been telling me about you." Clara tensed, wondering what exactly had been said. Her story was no secret in town, but she hated being the object of pity or gossip. "All good things," Mrs. Patterson said quickly, seeming to sense Clara's discomfort. "I mentioned you were alone while your brother's on the cattle drive. Sarah suggested we check in, see if you needed anything." "I'm fine," Clara said automatically, then caught herself. These women had ridden 10 miles to check on her. The least she could do was offer them hospitality. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." They accepted, and soon the three women were sitting around Clara's table, the first time in years she'd had company that was hers, not Jeremiah's. The conversation started stilted, careful, but gradually warmed. Sarah talked about adjusting to ranch life after growing up in Denver. Martha shared gossip from town, who was courting whom, whose crops were failing, the small dramas that made up community life. "I hear you're quite a reader," Sarah said eventually. "I brought some books if you'd like to borrow them. I have more than I know what to do with, and Thomas, my husband, says I need to stop buying them every time we go to Denver." "Books." Clara's eyes lit up before she could stop herself. "I would love that. I mean, if it's no trouble." "No trouble at all." Sarah went to her saddlebags and returned with 3 volumes. "Have you read Jane Eyre?" Clara shook her head, handling the book reverently. It had been so long since she'd held a new book, something Jeremiah hadn't already destroyed in one of his rages. "You'll love it," Sarah said. "It's about a woman who refuses to be broken by circumstances. She insists on her own worth, her own autonomy, even when the world tells her she has neither." The words hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Clara looked up to find both women watching her with expressions that were knowing but not pitying. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We help each other out here," Martha said. "That's how we survive." After they left with promises to return in a week, Clara sat with the book spread before her like treasure. She opened Jane Eyre first, reading the opening lines about a cold winter day and a girl who refused to be crushed by her circumstances. She read until the light failed, then lit a lamp, and read more, losing herself in a world where women could be strong, could choose their own paths, could say no and have it mean something. That night she dreamed not of broken ribs, but of walking across moors, of standing up to those who would diminish her, of choosing love on her own terms rather than having it beaten into submission. The third week brought challenges. A summer storm blew through violent and sudden, tearing part of the roof off the chicken coop. Clara stood in the rain, wrestling with boards and nails, trying to patch it before the chickens scattered. Her hands bled from splinters, her dress was soaked through, but she managed it. She fixed it herself without help, without a man to do it for her. She was standing back, admiring her work despite its rough appearance, when she heard a horse approaching. Her stomach dropped, thinking Jeremiah had returned early, but it was Thomas Garrett, Sarah's husband. "Mrs. Patterson said you might need help with repairs after the storm," he said, tipping his hat. He was older than Sarah, perhaps 45, with silver threading through his dark beard and eyes that seemed both sharp and kind. "I managed," Clara said, gesturing to the patched roof. Thomas dismounted and examined her work. "That'll hold?" he said approvingly. "You did good work." The praise, simple and genuine, made Clara's throat tight with unexpected emotion. When was the last time someone had praised her for anything? Let me at least help you check the rest of the property, Thomas offered. Storm like that can cause damage you might not see right away. They walked the property together, Thomas pointing out loose boards damaged fencing a tree that might fall if another storm came through. He didn't try to take over, didn't assume she couldn't understand or handle things. He simply shared knowledge, treated her as capable of learning and doing. Sarah says you're quite the reader, he said as they finished the inspection. She was kind to lend me books. Kind nothing. She's thrilled to have someone to discuss them with. I try, but I'm more partial to newspapers and farming journals myself. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Your brother doesn't know we've been visiting. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. No. Good. Some things are better kept between neighbors. He mounted his horse. If you need anything, repairs, supplies, help of any kind, you send word. Sarah and I, we believe in looking after our own. Our own. The words followed Clara into the cabin. Was she theirs? Did she belong to this community in a way that went beyond being Jeremiah's sister, Jeremiah's property? The days stretched into weeks, and with each passing sunrise, Clara felt the walls of her invisible prison expanding. The 4th week of Jeremiah's absence brought an unexpected test of her newfound independence. She woke to find one of the horses had broken through the fence during the night, disappearing into the wilderness beyond their property. The old Clara would have panicked, would have waited helplessly for a man to solve the problem. But this Clara, the one who had been secretly practicing with the rifle and fixing storm damage, saddled the remaining horse and rode out at dawn to track the escapee. The morning mist clung to the valleys as she followed the trail of broken branches and hoofprints. Her ribs still ached when she breathed too deeply, but the pain had transformed from sharp agony to a dull reminder of what she had survived. She found the horse grazing peacefully in a meadow 3 miles from home, and when she successfully led it back, the sense of accomplishment was intoxicating. She could do this. She could survive without Jeremiah, could thrive without his violent protection. Sarah Garrett visited again that afternoon, bringing more books and something else, a proposition that made Clara's heart race with equal parts excitement and terror. There's a church social next Sunday, Sarah said, watching Clara's face carefully. Nothing fancy, just neighbors gathering for food and conversation. Thomas and I would be honored if you'd join us. I couldn't, Clara said automatically, even as something inside her yearned to accept. If Jeremiah found out, how would he find out? Sarah asked gently. He's hundreds of miles away. And even if someone did write to him, what could they say? That you attended church, that you shared a meal with neighbors. There's nothing improper about it. Clara wanted to explain that propriety had nothing to do with Jeremiah's rules, that his control wasn't based on logic or morality, but on the simple desire to own her completely. But looking at Sarah's earnest face, she found herself nodding slowly. I'll think about it, she said, which was more than she'd ever dared before. That night she read by lamplight until her eyes burned, losing herself in stories of women who defied convention, who chose their own paths despite the obstacles placed before them. She thought about the church social, about the possibility of being just Clara, not Jeremiah's sister, not anyone's property, just herself among people who might see her as human. The decision to attend the social felt momentous when Sunday arrived. Clara spent an hour trying to make herself presentable, working with the limited wardrobe Jeremiah allowed her. She owned 3 dresses, all of them shapeless and dark, designed to make her invisible. But she pressed the best one carefully, pinned her hair in a style she remembered from before when their mother would help her prepare for special occasions. The Garretts arrived in their wagon just after noon, Sarah bright with encouragement, and Thomas quietly supportive. The ride to town felt like crossing into another world, each mile taking her further from the suffocating confines of her usual existence. The church grounds were bustling with activity when they arrived. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by various families. Children ran between the adults playing games, and conversation flowed as freely as the lemonade being poured from large glass pitchers. Clara's initial instinct was to shrink back to make herself small and unnoticeable, but Sarah's hand on her arm steadied her. Just breathe, Sarah whispered. You belong here as much as anyone. At first, Clara stood on the edges observing rather than participating, but gradually, tentatively, she found herself drawn into conversations. Mrs. Chen asked her opinion about preserving vegetables for winter. The pastor's wife complimented her dress, saying the color brought out her eyes. Young Tommy Morrison, whose father Tom had once tried to court her before Jeremiah's threats drove him away, shyly offered her a piece of cake his mother had made. "Miss Clara," he said, his 6-year-old formality charming. "Ma says you used to sing real pretty in church. Will you sing again sometime?" Clara's throat tightened. She had sung once upon a time before Jeremiah decided her voice was another thing that drew too much attention, another thing that needed to be silenced. "Maybe someday," she told Tommy, ruffling his hair gently. The afternoon passed in a blur of normal human interaction, the kind Clara had been starved of for years. She helped serve food, listened to stories about crops and weather and new babies, even laughed at Mr. Patterson's terrible jokes. For a few precious hours, she wasn't broken. Clara victim, Clara Jeremiah's possession. Clara. She was just Clara neighbor and friend person in her own right. It was late afternoon when she noticed him, a man she didn't recognize, tall and lean, with weathered features and intelligent eyes. He stood apart from the main gathering, talking quietly with Thomas Garrett, but his gaze kept drifting to Clara. Not in the leering way she was accustomed to from Jeremiah's friends, but with something that looked like curiosity, maybe even concern. "Who is that?" Clara asked Sarah quietly. Sarah followed her gaze and smiled. "That's Thomas's cousin, Matthew Sinclair. He's a doctor, travels through every few months to check on the folks who can't make it to town for medical care. He's a good man, lost his wife to fever 5 years back, never remarried. A doctor." Clara instinctively touched her side where her ribs still ached. How many times had she needed medical care but been denied it? How many injuries had healed wrong because Jeremiah wouldn't let her seek help? As if sensing her scrutiny, Matthew Sinclair looked directly at her. Their eyes met across the churchyard, and Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that had nothing to do with broken ribs. He nodded politely, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth before returning to his conversation with Thomas. The spell was broken by commotion near the tables. 2 men had started arguing over something Clara couldn't hear what, and the argument was escalating. One shoved the other, and suddenly fists were flying. The crowd scattered, women pulling children back, men moving to intervene. The violence, even though it wasn't directed at her, triggered something primal in Clara. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, muscles tensing, breathing shallow, the familiar preparation for pain. She backed away, bumping into someone, and found herself looking up at Matthew Sinclair. "It's all right," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady. "Just neighbors being foolish. Sheriff Mills will sort them out." Sure enough, the sheriff was already pulling the men apart, his authoritative presence quickly diffusing the situation. But Clara couldn't stop shaking, couldn't quiet the panic that violence always triggered in her now. "Would you like to sit down?" Matthew asked, gently guiding her to a bench away from the crowd. Sometimes these gatherings can be overwhelming. Clara wanted to protest that she was fine, that she didn't need help, but her legs felt unsteady, and the kindness in his voice undid her usual defenses. "I'm not usually so—" She paused, unsure how to finish. "Human," Matthew supplied with a gentle smile. "We all have our moments, Miss Hendricks. Nothing to be ashamed of." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, Clara gradually regaining her composure. She was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the way he managed to be supportive without crowding her, offering comfort without demanding gratitude. "Thomas tells me you've been managing the homestead alone while your brother's away," Matthew said eventually. "Yes." "That's impressive. Not many could handle that isolation and responsibility." Clara looked at him sharply, searching for condescension or pity, but found only genuine admiration. "It's been educational," she said carefully. Matthew chuckled. "I imagine so. Sometimes we don't know our own strength until we're forced to use it." Before Clara could respond, Sarah appeared slightly breathless. "Clara, we should probably head back soon. Thomas wants to check on the animals before dark." The ride home was quiet. Clara lost in thought about the afternoon, about the taste of normalcy she'd experienced, about intelligent eyes and a gentle voice that had calmed her panic without dismissing it. As they approached the cabin, dread settled in her stomach. The empty cabin that had felt like freedom this morning now seemed to echo with loneliness. "Thank you,"
she told the Garretts as they prepared to leave. For everything. This doesn't have to be a one-time thing, Sarah said. There's another gathering in 2 weeks. The harvest dance is coming up. You're part of this community, Clara, whether your brother likes it or not.
After they left, Clara stood in her empty cabin, still wearing her good dress, feeling like she was straddling two worlds. In one world, she was Jeremiah's broken sister, existing only in relation to his violence and control. In the other, she was Clara, who fixed roofs and tracked horses and laughed at bad jokes and made a doctor smile. She wanted to live in that second world, but fear whispered that it was temporary, an illusion that would shatter the moment Jeremiah returned. 3 months, she reminded herself. She still had more than 2 months to figure out how to make that second world real permanent hers. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Clara found a letter slipped under her door, no postmark, no indication of how it had arrived. Her hand shook as she opened it, recognizing Jeremiah's harsh handwriting immediately. Sister, it read, Bikipo, I trust you're behaving yourself in my absence. Remember, I have friends watching. Don't do anything that would make me cut this drive short. You wouldn't want me coming home early, would you? Take care of what's mine. J. The implicit threat made her stomach turn. He had people watching her reporting back. Someone at the social yesterday could have been his spy. She thought of everyone she'd talked to, wondering who might betray her, who was secretly in Jeremiah's pocket. The letter changed everything and nothing. She couldn't stop living just because Jeremiah might find out, but she had to be more careful. She burned the letter, watching his words turn to ash, wishing she could burn his hold over her just as easily. For the next few days, Clara kept to herself, venturing to town only for necessary supplies, avoiding eye contact and conversation. But isolation, which had once been her prison, now felt wrong. She'd tasted connection, community, and going back to emptiness was harder than she'd expected. It was Thursday when Matthew Sinclair appeared at her door, medical bag in hand. Clara's first instinct was to not answer, to hide until he left. But something about the patient way he knocked, then waited, then knocked again, made her open the door. Dr. Sinclair, she said formally, keeping the door partially closed. Miss Hendricks, I apologize for the intrusion, but Thomas mentioned you'd been injured some weeks back. Broken ribs, he thought. I wanted to ensure they were healing properly. I'm fine, Clara said automatically. I'm sure you are, Matthew replied easily. But broken ribs can cause complications if not properly tended. Punctured lungs, infection, chronic pain. I'd hate for you to suffer unnecessarily when a simple examination could prevent future problems. Clara wanted to refuse, but the mention of chronic pain resonated. She'd been living with pain so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. What if she didn't have to? I can't pay you, she said, her last defense. I didn't ask for payment. Consider it neighborly concern. She stepped back, allowing him entry. The cabin seemed smaller with him in it, his presence filling the space in a way that wasn't threatening but was definitely unsettling. He set his bag on the table and turned to her with professional detachment. May I? He asked, gesturing to her ribs. Clara nodded, trying not to flinch as his hands gently probed her side through the fabric of her dress. His touch was clinical, careful, nothing like the hands she was used to. 3, possibly 4 ribs, he murmured, confirming what she already knew. How long ago? 6 weeks. She lied. It had been 4, but she didn't want him calculating that Jeremiah had been home when it happened. They're healing, but not well. You've been compensating, favoring your right side, which is causing strain on your back. He stepped back, reaching into his bag. I have something that might help with the pain, allow you to move more normally while you finish healing. He produced a bottle of laudanum, and Claire immediately shook her head. No, I don't want anything that would impair me. Matthew studied her for a moment, then nodded, putting the bottle away. Understood. Let me show you some exercises instead, movements that will help with the healing and reduce the pain. He demonstrated stretches and breathing exercises, keeping his instructions clear and his manner professional. But Clara noticed things the way he turned his back when she needed to adjust her dress, to try a movement the way he asked permission before any physical contact, the way he seemed to understand without being told that she needed to maintain control. You should also eat more, he said as he packed his bag. Healing requires fuel. I noticed your garden's doing well, that's good. Fresh vegetables will help. You noticed my garden." A slight color touched his cheeks. "I'm observant by nature and profession. I notice many things." There was weight to those words, meaning Clara couldn't quite decipher. Did he notice the other injuries, the ones that had healed but left their marks? Did he notice the way she flinched at sudden movements, the way she kept her back to walls, the way she never fully relaxed, even in her own home? "Thank you," she said as he prepared to leave, "for the exercises, for not insisting." "You're welcome." He paused at the door. "Miss Hendricks, Clara, you don't have to be alone in this. Whatever this is, there are people who would help if you asked." After he left, Clara stood in the middle of her cabin feeling exposed and protected simultaneously. He knew. Maybe not the details, but Matthew Sinclair knew she was broken and was offering to help her heal not just physically, but in ways she couldn't quite name. That night she practiced the exercises he'd shown, her feeling muscles stretch and release that had been clenched for weeks. The pain didn't disappear, but it changed, became manageable rather than overwhelming. She thought about his words about not being alone, about asking for help. Foreign concepts. Dangerous concepts, but increasingly tempting ones. The next morning brought Sarah Garrett again, this time with an invitation Clara couldn't refuse. "I need help with canning," Sarah announced. "I've got more tomatoes than I know what to do with, and Thomas is useless at it. Says it's women's work, though he's happy enough to eat the results come winter." Clara wanted to point out that she had her own preserving to do, her own preparations for winter, but Sarah's expression suggested this was about more than tomatoes. She spent the day at the Garrett Ranch working alongside Sarah in a kitchen that was warm and welcoming, and everything her own wasn't. They worked in comfortable rhythm, Sarah chatting about inconsequential things, while Clara gradually relaxed into the normalcy of it. "Matthew asked after you," Sarah said casually as they sealed another jar. Clara's hands stilled. "Oh. Wanted to know if you'd always lived here, what you like to read, whether you might attend the harvest dance." "That seems like a lot of interest for someone who barely knows me." Sarah smiled. "Matthew doesn't do anything by halves. When something catches his attention, he's thorough about it." "I'm not something to be caught," Clara said more sharply than intended. "No," Sarah agreed seriously. "You're not. And Matthew would be the first to agree. He's not like other men." Clara wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to know more about this man who knocked patiently and asked permission and noticed gardens, but she was afraid of the answer, afraid of the hope that was building despite her best efforts to suppress it. As she rode home that evening, jars of preserved tomatoes in her saddlebags, Sarah had insisted she take some despite her protests. Clara felt the shape of her life shifting. These people were drawing her in, making her part of something larger than Jeremiah's violence and her own survival. It was dangerous and wonderful and terrifying. 2 weeks passed in this new rhythm. Clara attended another church social, helped Mrs. Chen with her garden, even sang quietly with the church choir during practice, though she didn't dare perform during actual services. Matthew appeared twice more, once to check on her ribs once, supposedly by accident when she was in town for supplies. "Fancy meeting you here," he'd said with a smile that suggested the meeting was anything but accidental. They'd talked for nearly an hour outside the general store about books and medicine and the coming winter. He made her laugh with stories of his more eccentric patients, and she found herself sharing carefully edited stories of her own glimpses of who she was beyond the violence that had shaped her recent years. "You're different than I expected," he told her as they prepared to part ways. "What did you expect?" "Someone broken," he said simply. "Instead, I find someone breaking free." The words stayed with her as she rode home, echoing in her mind as she did her evening chores. Breaking free. Was that what she was doing? It felt more like she was building something new on top of the broken pieces, using them as foundation rather than letting them be rubble. That night she counted her money again. Between what Jeremiah had left and what she'd saved, she had nearly $80. Enough to get away to start over somewhere he'd never find her. The thought was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. But running meant leaving the Garretts, leaving Mrs. Chen's kindness, leaving the community that was slowly accepting her. It meant leaving Matthew and his patient knocks and careful observations. It meant being alone again, just in a different place. She was contemplating this when she heard horses approaching, multiple sets of hoofbeats moving fast. Her blood froze. Jeremiah. Had something happened to bring him back early? But the voices that called out weren't his. She recognized Bill Matthews and another of Jeremiah's drinking companions. Cole, the one who'd leered at her during that card game weeks ago. "Open up, Clara, son," Matthews called. "Got a message from your brother." Clara's hands shook as she opened the door, keeping the rifle just out of sight, but within reach. The men dismounted, and she could smell the whiskey from where she stood. "Gentlemen," she said carefully, "it's late." "Not too late for family business," Cole said, his eyes roving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Jeremiah sent us to check on you. Make sure you're behaving yourself." "I'm fine," Clara said. "You can report back that everything is as he left it." Now, Matthews said, pushing past her into the cabin without invitation. "We need to be thorough. Jeremiah was very specific about making sure you weren't getting any ideas." Cole followed, and suddenly Clara's sanctuary was violated by their presence. They moved through the space, touching things, examining everything with proprietary interest. "Lot of books here," Cole observed, picking up the volume of Jane Eyre. "Jeremiah know you're reading this stuff." "He's never objected to my reading," Clara said, which was technically true. He'd burned books in rage, but never specifically forbidden her from reading what remained. "Seems like the kind of thing that gives women ideas," Matthews said. "Independence and such. Unnatural thoughts." Clara bit her tongue, knowing anything she said would be twisted and reported back to Jeremiah in the worst possible light. "And what's this?" Cole had found the preserves from Sarah. "Fancy jarring. You didn't make these." "A neighbor traded them for eggs," Clara lied smoothly. "Which neighbor?" Matthews pressed. "Mrs. Patterson," Clara said, choosing someone Jeremiah would find acceptable. The men exchanged glances, and Clara realized they'd been hoping to catch her in something to have news to report that would bring Jeremiah racing back. The thought that they wanted her to suffer, that they were disappointed to find her behaving, made rage bloom in her chest. "Well," Matthews said finally, "everything seems in order, but we'll be checking in regular-like. Jeremiah's instructions." "How thoughtful of him," Clara managed. Cole stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the tobacco stains on his teeth. "You know, if you get lonely here all by yourself, I'd be happy to keep you company." "That won't be necessary," Clara said, stepping back. "Come on, Cole," Matthews said, but he was smirking. "Leave Jeremiah's property alone." Property. There it was, stated plain. Not sister, not person, but property. After they left, Clara barricaded the door and sat up all night with the rifle across her lap. She felt violated, exposed, reminded that Jeremiah's reach extended even hundreds of miles away. The freedom she'd been building, the community she'd been joining, the future she'd been imagining, all of it felt fragile as glass, ready to shatter at his return. But as dawn broke and she watched the sun paint the mountains gold, Clara made a decision. She wouldn't cower. She wouldn't hide. She had 2 months left, and she would use every minute of them. If Jeremiah's spies wanted to watch, let them watch her become something he'd never expected, something he couldn't control. She went to town that day, head high, and when Matthew Sinclair happened to encounter her at the general store again, she didn't pretend the meeting was accidental. "Would you like to have coffee?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. His face lit up. "I would like that very much." They sat in the small cafe attached to the boarding house in full view of anyone who cared to look, and talked for 2 hours. About medicine and books about loss, he of his wife, she carefully of her parents, about dreams deferred and hopes sustained. "I leave for Denver next week," he told her eventually. "Medical supplies and such. I'll be gone a month." Clara tried not to let her disappointment show. A month was half her remaining freedom. "But I'll be back before the harvest dance," he continued. "I was hoping, that is, would you consider allowing me to escort you?" The invitation hung between them, heavy with implications. Going to the dance with Matthew would be a public declaration of something, though Clara wasn't sure what. It would certainly get back to Jeremiah. It would certainly have consequences. "Yes," she said, surprising herself again. "I'd like that." Matthew's smile was worth whatever price she'd pay later. The news of their coffee and the dance invitation spread through town like wildfire. Clara felt the eyes on her wherever she went, some approving, some concerned, some calculating how Jeremiah would react. But she held her head high, refusing to be ashamed of accepting kindness, of reaching for something beyond mere survival. Sarah was thrilled. "It's about time," she declared, then sobered. "You know there will be talk." "There's always talk," Clara replied. "At least now it's about something I've actually done." But the reality of her situation crashed back when she returned home to find another note, this one nailed to her door. "Heard you're stepping out. He won't like it. Stop now or face consequences." No signature, but Clara recognized Cole's crude handwriting. She tore the note down, burned it like the first, but the threat lingered. They were watching reporting, trying to control her even in Jeremiah's absence. That night she sat with the rifle and made plans. Not just for running anymore, but for fighting if necessary. She had 2 months to get stronger, to prepare to build alliances that might protect her when Jeremiah returned. It wasn't much time, but it was more than she'd ever had before. The next morning, she found Thomas Garrett at her door. "Heard you might be having some trouble with unwanted visitors," he said without preamble. "I can handle it," Clara said, though she appreciated his concern. "I'm sure you can, but you shouldn't have to handle it alone." He handed her something, a bell small but loud. "Ring this if you need help. Sound carries far out here. Sarah and I will hear it. We'll come." The simple offer of protection, of community support, made Clara's eyes burn with unshed tears. "Thank you," she managed. "You're welcome. And Clara Matthews a good man. Don't let anyone make you feel wrong for seeing that." After Thomas left, Clara held the bell, feeling its weight, its promise. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who would come if she called, who saw her as worth protecting, worth caring about. It was a foreign feeling, but one she was slowly learning to accept. The days passed with a new tension. Clara continued her routines, tending the garden, caring for the animals, practicing with the rifle, but now she was always aware of potentially watching eyes. Matthews and Cole didn't return, but she sometimes caught glimpses of riders in the distance, watching the cabin before moving on. She refused to let it stop her. When Sarah invited her to help with more canning, she went. When Mrs. Chen asked for help organizing the church library, she volunteered. When the pastor's wife mentioned they needed someone to teach the younger children their letters, Clara offered her services. Each action was a small rebellion, a declaration that she was more than Jeremiah's property, more than his victim. She was a member of this community, and no amount of surveillance could change that. 3 weeks before Jeremiah's expected return, Matthew came back from Denver early. Clara was teaching the children when he appeared in the church doorway, travel-worn but smiling. "You're back," she said, unable to hide her pleasure. "I found what I needed sooner than expected," he replied, though his eyes suggested she might have been what he needed to find. He waited while she finished the lesson, then walked her home, leading his horse rather than riding, prolonging their time together. "I brought you something in," he said, producing a package from his saddlebags. "I hope it's not too presumptuous." Inside was a book, not just any book, but a medical text about anatomy and healing. "You seemed interested when we discussed my work," he explained. "I thought you might enjoy learning more." Clara held the book like it was precious, which it was. Not just for its contents, but for what it represented, someone seeing her as capable of learning, of growing, of being more than she was allowed to be. "It's perfect," she said softly. They stood at her door, neither wanting to part, but both aware of the proprieties they needed to observe. Finally, Matthew took her hand just for a moment, his touch gentle but grounding. 3 weeks until the dance," he said. "I find myself counting the days." "As do I," Clara admitted. After he left, she stood in her doorway watching until he disappeared from view, the medical text clutched to her chest. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until the dance. 3 weeks until Jeremiah's return. The countdown had begun, and Clara wasn't sure if she was racing toward freedom or disaster. That night she read the medical text by lamplight, absorbing information about the human body, about healing and harm, about all the ways people could be broken, and all the ways they could be mended. Knowledge felt like armor, like weapons, like hope. When she finally slept, she dreamed of dancing, of Matthew's careful hands, of a future where broken ribs could heal completely and broken spirits could soar. But underneath the dreams was the steady drumbeat of approaching hoofbeats of Jeremiah's return, of the reckoning that was coming, whether she was ready or not. The morning after Matthew's visit, Clara woke to the sound of thunder rolling across the mountains, though no rain fell. She stood at her window watching dark clouds gather on the horizon and couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was more than meteorological. Time was running short each day, bringing Jeremiah's return closer, and with it, the end of everything she'd begun to build. She dressed carefully, wrapping her ribs with the binding Matthew had shown her how to use, noting with satisfaction that the pain had diminished to a manageable ache. The medical text lay open on her table where she'd left it the night before, its pages revealing secrets about the human body that fascinated and empowered her. Understanding how things broke also meant understanding how they healed, how they could be protected. A knock at the door interrupted her morning routine, but it wasn't the patient, careful knock she'd come to associate with Matthew. This was sharp, demanding. Clara grabbed the rifle before opening the door to find Cole standing there, his presence immediately filling her with revulsion. "Morning, Clara," he said, tipping his hat mockingly. "Thought I'd check on you, make sure you're not lonely."
"I'm fine," she said, keeping the rifle visible, but not quite pointed at him. "What do you want?"
"Now, is that any way to greet a friend of your brother's?" He leaned against the doorframe, his body language suggesting he had no intention of leaving quickly. "Heard you've been spending time with that doctor fellow. Jeremiah know about that." "There's nothing to know. Dr. Sinclair treated my injuries, that's all." Cole's laugh was ugly. "That's not what I heard. Coffee at the boarding house, pretty cozy for medical treatment." Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. "What I do is none of your concern. Everything you do is Jeremiah's concern, which makes it mine." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "He asked me to look after you, make sure you don't get into trouble." "I don't need looking after." "No." Cole stepped closer and Clara raised the rifle slightly enough to make her point. He stopped but didn't retreat. "Careful with that thing. Wouldn't want an accident. Jeremiah would be real upset if something happened to you before he got back." The threat was clear. Jeremiah wanted her intact for his own violence, not damaged by anyone else's. Clara met Cole's eyes steadily, letting him see that she wasn't the same cowering girl he'd leered at during those card games. "I know how to handle a rifle," she said quietly. "My father taught me. I'm a very good shot." Something in her tone must have convinced him because Cole stepped back, his smirk faltering slightly. "Just remember," he said as he turned to leave, "Jeremiah will hear about everything. Every visit, every conversation, every look that lasts too long. He'll know." After he left, Clara's hand shook as she barricaded the door. The threat of surveillance was almost worse than actual violence because it was constant, insidious, eroding her sense of safety, even in Jeremiah's absence. But she refused to let it paralyze her. If they wanted to watch, let them see her becoming stronger. She spent the morning reading the medical text, learning about pressure points and vulnerable areas, knowledge that felt like self-defense, even though Matthew had surely meant it for healing. In the afternoon, she practiced with the rifle until her shoulder ached, and her aim was true, hitting the same spot on the tree repeatedly until the bark splintered away. Sarah arrived just as Clara was cleaning the rifle, her friend's presence immediately lightening the oppressive atmosphere Cole had left behind. "That man was here," Sarah said without preamble. "Cole. Thomas saw him leaving." "He wanted to remind me that I'm being watched," Clara replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Sarah's expression hardened. "Thomas wants to talk to the sheriff about harassment." "No," Clara said quickly. "That would only make things worse. Jeremiah would see it as me causing trouble, turning the law against his friends. So we do nothing. We be careful. We be smart." Clara set the rifle aside and met her friend's concerned gaze. "I knew this would happen when I started living instead of just surviving. I accepted the risk." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then pulled her into an unexpected hug. Clara stiffened, initially unused to physical affection that didn't hurt, then slowly relaxed into the embrace. "You're braver than you know," Sarah whispered. That evening, Clara stood in front of her small mirror, practicing something she hadn't done in years, smiling.
Not the careful, appeasing smile she gave Jeremiah to avoid violence, not the tight expression she wore in town to avoid questions, but a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. It felt foreign on her face, but also right, like remembering a language she'd once been fluent in. The harvest dance was 2.5 weeks away. She had no proper dress for it, nothing that would be appropriate for such an occasion. The thought of appearing beside Matthew in one of her shapeless dark dresses made her stomach twist with embarrassment. But buying fabric for a new dress would certainly get back to Jeremiah would be seen as vanity, as stepping above her station. As if reading her thoughts across the distance, Sarah appeared the next day with a bundle of fabric. "I bought too much for my own dress," she lied transparently. "Thought you might help me by taking some off my hands." The fabric was beautiful, a deep blue that would bring out Clara's eyes, soft but sturdy, perfect for a dress that could be both practical and pretty. Clara touched it, reverently torn between desire and fear. "I couldn't. If Jeremiah found out, then we make sure he doesn't find out until it's too late to matter," Sarah said firmly. "Clara, you deserve this. You deserve one night of feeling beautiful, of being seen as who you really are, not what he's made you." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I don't even remember who I really am." "Then isn't it time you found out?" They spent the next 3 days working on the dress in secret at Sarah's ranch, where Cole and Matthews couldn't spy. Clara had forgotten the pleasure of creating something beautiful, of watching fabric transform under her hands into something that was entirely hers. Sarah was an excellent teacher-patient with Clara's rusty sewing skills, and together they created a dress that was modest but flattering, appropriate but special. "You look like yourself," Sarah said when Clara tried it on, and somehow that made perfect sense, even though Clara wasn't sure who that self was yet. The days passed in a strange, suspended state, each one bringing both anticipation and dread. Clara continued her daily routines, but everything felt charged with meaning. The vegetables she harvested might be the last she'd grow in this garden. The eggs she gathered might be the last from these chickens. Every sunrise might be the last one she'd see as a free woman. Matthew visited twice more each time with a medical pretense that fooled no one. He checked her ribs, declared them healing well, but lingered to discuss the books she was reading, to share stories of his travels, to simply exist in her space in a way that felt both comfortable and thrilling. "I've been thinking," he said during his second visit, his tone careful. "After the harvest dance, after your brother returns, what are your plans?" Clara's hands stilled in their task of making tea. "I don't make plans. Jeremiah decides what happens. But if you had a choice." The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities she didn't dare voice. "Choice is a luxury I can't afford." Matthew moved closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "What if I could help make it affordable?" Clara's heart raced. Was he suggesting what she thought? You don't know what you're offering. You don't know what Jeremiah is capable of. "I know enough," Matthew said quietly. "I know what broken ribs look like when they're caused by boots, not falls. I know what fear looks like when it's been beaten into someone over years. I know what courage looks like when someone decides to live despite all of it." Clara turned away, unable to bear the compassion in his eyes. Knowing and experiencing are different things. Jeremiah won't just let me go. I'm his property, his to control, his to break. "You're a person," Matthew said firmly, "not property. And there are laws. Laws that everyone ignores. Laws that require proof, witnesses, people willing to stand against him." Clara's voice was bitter. "You think you're the first man to show interest, to think you could save me? Tom Morrison tried. Samuel Chen tried. Ask them how that worked out." "I'm not trying to save you," Matthew said, and the statement was so unexpected that Clara turned to face him. "You're already saving yourself. I'm just offering to stand beside you while you do it." The distinction mattered more than Clara could express. Not a rescue, but a partnership. Not salvation, but support. It was a different kind of offer, one that recognized her agency even in her captivity. "The dance," she said finally. "Let's just focus on the dance. Whatever comes after, we'll face it when it comes." Matthew nodded, accepting her terms, but his eyes promised he wouldn't disappear when things got difficult. A week before the dance, Clara woke to find her garden destroyed.
Every plant had been torn up by the roots, vegetables smashed, weeks of careful tending obliterated overnight. She stood among the wreckage, rage building in her chest like a physical thing. There was no note, no message, but she knew who was responsible. Cole or Matthews or one of Jeremiah's other flying monkeys sending a message about what happened when she stepped out of line. She spent the morning cleaning up the destruction, her movements methodical, her face set. When Thomas and Sarah arrived, having somehow heard about the damage, she was replanting what could be salvaged. "This has gone too far," Thomas said, his usual calm demeanor replaced by cold anger. "This is destruction of property. We can get the sheriff." "No," Clara said firmly. "This is what they want, to provoke me into doing something that will bring Jeremiah back early, furious, and righteous. I won't give them that satisfaction." "So you just take it?" Sarah asked, distressed. "I survive it," Clara corrected. "There's a difference, and I remember it. Every destroyed plant, every threat, every attempt to break me down. I remember, and I get stronger." She worked in the garden all day, salvaging what she could, accepting help from the Garretts, but refusing to be defeated. By evening, the garden looked different, but not destroyed. Like her, it would survive, would grow back, would prove that destruction wasn't the end. That night, she found another note, this one more direct: "Stop seeing the doctor, or things get worse. This is your last warning." Clara read it once, then added it to the fire. Warnings meant they were worried, meant her defiance was having an effect. Good. Let them worry. Let them report to Jeremiah that his broken sister wasn't staying broken. 3 days before the dance, Matthew arrived with an unexpected companion. Sheriff Mills, a grizzled man in his 50s who'd held the position for as long as Clara could remember. "Miss Hendricks," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Doc here says you've been having some trouble with trespassers." Clara glanced at Matthew, who met her gaze steadily. "Just some minor vandalism," she said carefully. "Destroyed garden doesn't sound minor to me," the sheriff replied. "Mind if I look around?" He examined the garden. The cabin took notes in a small book. "I know Jeremiah asked some of the boys to check on you," he said finally. "But checking and harassing are different things. You see Cole or Matthews or any of them again, you tell them Sheriff Mills is aware of the situation. Sometimes a reminder of the law is enough to keep men in line." After he left, Clara turned to Matthew. "You shouldn't have done that." "Yes, I should have. You're not alone in this, Clara. The whole town knows what's happening. Most are too afraid of Jeremiah to act, but not everyone. The sheriff, the Garretts. Mrs. Chenmey, we're not afraid." "You should be," Clara said softly. "Perhaps. But fear and caution aren't the same thing. I'm cautious about Jeremiah. But I'm not afraid. Not when it comes to you." The night before the dance, Clara couldn't sleep. She paced her cabin, checked and rechecked the rifle, counted her money again. $87 now after careful saving. Enough to run if she needed to. Enough to start over. The question was whether she'd get the chance. She tried on the dress one more time, barely recognizing the woman in the mirror. This woman looked strong, capable, even pretty. This woman looked like she might dance and laugh and choose her own path. This woman looked free. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Not Matthew's patient rap or the demanding pounds of Jeremiah's friends, but something tentative. She grabbed the rifle before opening the door to find Mrs. Chen standing there with a small package. "For tomorrow," the older woman said, pressing the package into Clara's hands. "Every woman deserves something special for her first dance." Inside was a pair of delicate gloves and a small bottle of rose water. Simple gifts, but the kindness behind them made Clara's throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she managed. Mrs. Chen touched her cheek gently. "You remind me of my daughter," she said, "strong in ways she doesn't even know. Tomorrow you dance, you smile, you be young and free. Whatever comes after, at least you have that." The morning of the dance dawned clear and bright, as if the universe had decided to offer perfect weather as a gift. Clara went through her morning routines with special care, each action feeling momentous. She fed the chickens, tended what remained of her garden, cleaned the cabin until it shone. If Jeremiah came back tomorrow, at least he couldn't fault her housekeeping. Sarah arrived in the afternoon to help her prepare. They heated water for a proper bath, washed, and pinned Clara's hair in an elegant style that softened her face. The dress fit perfectly, transforming her from Jeremiah's broken sister
into someone entirely new. "You're beautiful," Sarah breathed, and for the first time in 7 years, Clara almost believed it. Matthew arrived just as the sun was beginning to set, dressed in his best suit, looking nervous and hopeful and handsome in a way that made Clara's heart race. His expression when he saw her was worth every risk she was taking. "Clara," he said her name a prayer on his lips. "You look— I don't have adequate words. You look quite fine yourself," she managed, surprised by her own boldness. He offered her his arm, and she took it, the simple contact feeling like a declaration of war against everything Jeremiah had tried to beat into her. They walked to his wagon where Sarah and Thomas were already waiting, a small convoy of rebellion heading toward town. The dance was held in the church hall decorated with autumn leaves and lanterns that cast warm light over everything. The entire town seemed to be there, and Clara felt their eyes as she entered on Matthew's arm. Some looks were approving, others worried, a few disapproving. But Clara held her head high, refusing to be ashamed of claiming this moment for herself. The first dance was announced, and Matthew led her onto the floor with a grace that surprised her. "I practiced," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Thomas taught me. I wanted to do this right." They moved together to the music, and Clara found her body remembering steps her feet had forgotten. Muscle memory from before violence became her only physical language. Other couples joined them, but Clara was aware only of Matthew's hand at her waist, proper, but protective, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not what I expected when I first came here," he said as they danced. "Thomas told me about his neighbor's sister suggested I check on you. I expected to find someone defeated. Aren't I?" "No," he said firmly. "Wounded, yes. Cautious, certainly, but not defeated. Never defeated. You're the strongest person I know, Clara Hendricks." They danced 3 more dances before propriety demanded they take a break. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers, people who'd never spoken to her directly before, suddenly eager to compliment her dress, her dancing, her courage in coming. "About time someone showed that brother of yours that you're a person, not property," old Mrs. Wilson said with surprising vehemence. "Been watching him control you for years, all of us too cowardly to say anything. Shame on us." The elderly woman's honesty was both validating and painful. All these people had known, had watched, had done nothing. But Clara couldn't hold on to resentment, not tonight. Tonight was for joy, however fleeting. Halfway through the evening, the music stopped abruptly. Clara's blood froze as she saw why Cole and Matthews had entered, both clearly drunk, both staring directly at her. "Well, well," Cole said loudly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. "Looks like Clara's forgotten her place." Matthews stepped forward, putting himself partially between Clara and the men. "Gentlemen, this is a private event. If you haven't purchased tickets—" "We're here on Jeremiah's business," Matthews interrupted, "making sure his sister isn't doing anything inappropriate." "Dancing at a church social is hardly inappropriate," Sheriff Mills said, appearing from the crowd. "Unless you boys are suggesting otherwise." The tension in the room was palpable. Clara felt every eye on her, waiting to see what she would do. The old Clara would have shrunk back, would have left quietly to avoid confrontation. But she wasn't that Clara anymore. "I'm attending a community dance with a proper escort," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. "There's nothing inappropriate about it, and Jeremiah has no say in the matter while he's hundreds of miles away." Cole's face darkened. "He'll have plenty to say when he gets back." "Then I'll deal with that when he returns," Clara replied. "Tonight, I'm dancing." She turned her back on them, a gesture so bold it drew gasps from some of the crowd. Matthew offered her his arm again, and they returned to the dance floor. After a moment's hesitation, the music resumed, and other couples joined them, creating a buffer of normalcy around them. Cole and Matthews lingered for a few more minutes. Their presence, a dark cloud at the edge of the celebration, but eventually the sheriff's steady gaze and the community's cold shoulders drove them out. "That was brave," Matthew murmured as they danced. "That was necessary," Clara corrected. "If I back down now, I'll never stop backing down." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and laughter and moments of happiness Clara stored away like treasure. She danced with Thomas, with the pastor, even with young Tommy Morrison, who stood on her feet and grinned up at her with innocent joy.
But always she returned to Matthew, drawn to him like a compass finding north. As the evening wound down, they stepped outside for air. The night was cool and clear stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. They stood close, but not quite touching, aware of the proprieties, but reluctant to maintain them. "Clara, Matthew began. Then stopped, seeming to gather his courage. "I know the timing is terrible. I know everything is about to become complicated. But I need you to know I love you. I've loved you since that first day at the church social when you stood there shaking but refused to run. I love your strength and your kindness and your refusal to let cruelty make you cruel." Clara's breath caught. Love. The word felt foreign and familiar simultaneously, like a language she'd once known but hadn't heard in so long she'd forgotten its sound. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough, and I want to know more if you'll let me. Jeremiah is not here, and when he returns, we'll face that together, if you want to." Matthew turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I'm just asking you to know that you have options. You have people who care about you. You have a future beyond that cabin, beyond his control if you choose to take it." Clara wanted to warn him about the violence that was coming, about the rage Jeremiah would unleash when he returned to find she'd been living, dancing, falling in love. But looking at Matthew's determined face, she realized he already knew. He'd counted the cost and decided she was worth it. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to choose happiness when I've been trained to expect pain." "Then we learn together," Matthew said simply. "One day at a time. One choice at a time." Before Clara could respond, Thomas appeared, his expression grim. "Riders coming," he said quietly. "Moving fast." Clara's heart stopped. Jeremiah. It had to be Jeremiah, returned early, informed by Cole and Matthews about her rebellion. This was it. The reckoning she'd known was coming. But as the riders approached, she realized it wasn't Jeremiah. It was a single rider moving fast, and as he came into the light from the hall, she recognized one of the Garrison ranch hands. "Looking for Doc Sinclair," the man panted, sliding off his horse. "There's been an accident at the ranch. Mr. Garrison's son thrown from a horse. It's bad." Matthew immediately shifted into his professional persona. "I'll get my bag." He turned to Clara, torn between duty and desire. "I have to go." "Of course you do," Clara said, understanding completely. "Go, help them." He squeezed her hand once, a promise in the gesture, then was gone, riding off into the night to save a life. Clara watched him go, then turned to find Sarah beside her. "Come home with us tonight," Sarah offered. "You shouldn't be alone after all this." Clara was tempted, but she shook her head. "I need to go home. My home. I need to face whatever's coming on my own ground." Thomas and Sarah tried to argue, but Clara was firm. They drove her back to the cabin in worried silence, making her promise to ring the bell if she needed help. Clara entered her dark cabin, still wearing her dance dress, the scent of rosewater still clinging to her skin. She lit a lamp and stood in the middle of the room, looking around at the space that had been her prison for 7 years. It looked different somehow, smaller, less imposing. Or maybe she was bigger, had grown beyond its ability to contain her. She carefully removed the dress hanging it where she could see it, a reminder of the night she'd been herself. Then she put on her regular clothes, loaded the rifle, and sat down to wait. Because Jeremiah was coming. If not tonight, then tomorrow or the next day. Cole and Matthews would make sure he knew everything would embellish and exaggerate until her simple dance became a scandal in his mind. He would come back furious, violent, ready to reassert his control. But Clara wasn't the same woman he'd left 3 months ago. She was stronger both in body and spirit. She had allies, people who would come if she called. She had knowledge, medical and practical. She had money hidden away and plans half-formed. Most importantly, she had tasted freedom, community, and love. She knew now what life could be beyond Jeremiah's violence, and that knowledge couldn't be beaten out of her. As dawn approached, painting the mountains with pale light, Clara made a decision. She wouldn't run. Not yet. She would face, Jeremiah would stand her ground, would fight if necessary. Because running would mean leaving Matthew, leaving the Garretts, leaving the community that had finally embraced her. Running would mean letting Jeremiah win, letting him drive her from the only home she'd known. She thought of her mother, of her father, of the people they'd raised their children to be before violence and whiskey poisoned everything. They wouldn't want her to run. They'd want her to stand up to reclaim her life to become the woman she was meant to be. The sound of approaching horses interrupted her thoughts, multiple riders moving with purpose. Clara stood rifle in hand and moved to the window, but it wasn't Jeremiah. It was Sheriff Mills along with 2 deputies, and they were escorting someone Matthew looking exhausted but determined. Clara opened the door confused. "What's happening?" "Morning, Miss Hendricks," the sheriff said. "Doc here has something to tell you, and he wanted witnesses." Matthew dismounted his clothes, still bearing the evidence of his night's work. "The Garrison boy will live," he said. First then took a deep breath. "Clara, I've sent a telegram to the federal marshal in Denver about your situation, about the systematic abuse and imprisonment you've suffered." Clara's knees nearly buckled. "You did what—" "There are laws." Matthew continued, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Federal laws about holding someone against their will, about slavery and involuntary servitude. What Jeremiah has done to you, it's not just wrong, it's illegal. And unlike local law, federal law doesn't care about his connections or his threats." "The marshal will be here within the week," Sheriff Mills added. "And until then, Miss Hendricks, you're under my protection. Anyone who threatens or harms you will answer to me and to federal authority." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. Protection. Legal protection. A way out that didn't involve running, that involved standing and fighting with the law on her side. "Why," she finally managed, looking at Matthew. "Because you deserve justice," he said simply. "Because you deserve freedom that's recognized and protected, not stolen in the night. Because I love you, and I refuse to let him hurt you again." The sheriff cleared his throat. "There's more, Miss Hendricks. That telegram also went to the Garrison Ranch. Seems Jeremiah's been skimming from the cattle drive, cheating his employers. Mr. Garrison's not pleased. Your brother might find himself facing charges of his own when he returns." The world seemed to shift under Clara's feet. Everything was changing too fast to process. She'd expected violence and got protection. She'd prepared for a beating and received hope for justice. "I need to sit down," she said faintly, and Matthew was there supporting her, guiding her to a chair. "I know it's a lot," he said gently, "but you're not alone in this, not anymore." Clara sat in her chair, the weight of the sheriff's words settling over her like a heavy blanket. Federal marshals. Legal protection. Jeremiah facing charges of his own. It seemed impossible, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the chair, trying to anchor herself to this new reality. "Miss Hendricks," Sheriff Mills said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I need to ask you some questions. Document things properly for when the marshal arrives. Are you willing to talk about what's been happening here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. To speak the truth meant breaking 7 years of silence, 7 years of hiding bruises and making excuses. Clara looked at Matthew, who nodded encouragingly, then at the sheriff, who waited patiently. "Yes," she said, finally the word barely a whisper. Then stronger, "Yes, I'll talk." For the next 2 hours, Clara spoke. She told them about the gradual escalation after their parents died, how grief had turned to control to violence. She described the beatings, the broken bones that never received proper treatment, the systematic isolation from anyone who might help. She spoke of burned books and destroyed possessions, of being forbidden from working or having friends, of being treated as property rather than a person. The sheriff wrote everything down, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Matthew sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence, his support. When she faltered, struggling to find words for particularly painful memories, he would ask gentle questions that helped her continue. "The broken ribs," the sheriff said eventually. "Doc says they were recent. 4 weeks ago." "Yes, the night before he left for the cattle drive." "What prompted that particular assault?" Clara closed her eyes, remembering. "I had smiled at Mrs. Chen in town that day. He said I was flirting, trying to shame him. He kicked me until I couldn't breathe, said he was reminding me of my place." She heard Matthew's sharp intake of breath but didn't look at him. If she saw pity in his eyes, she might stop talking, and she needed to get it all out. When she finally finished, the sun was high in the sky and her throat was raw. The sheriff closed his notebook, his weathered face grim. Miss Hendricks, what you've described is criminal assault, false imprisonment, and slavery in all but name. The federal marshal will want to hear all this again, but I want you to know this ends now. Jeremiah Hendricks will not lay another hand on you. After the sheriff and his deputies left with promises to check on her daily, Clara and Matthew sat in silence. The cabin felt different now, as if speaking the truth had exorcised some of its ghosts. "You were brave," Matthew said finally. "I was tired," Clara corrected. "Tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being ashamed of things that weren't my fault." Matthew reached for her hand and she let him take it, his touch gentle and grounding. "What do you need now?" "Time," Clara said. "Time to think, to understand what this means." She met his eyes. "You've risked a lot for me. Jeremiah won't forget this. Even if he faces charges, even if he goes to prison, he'll want revenge." "Let him want it," Matthew said firmly. "I'm not afraid of him." "You should be. You don't know what he's capable of. And he doesn't know what I'm capable of when it comes to protecting someone I love." The word hung between them again, love. Clara wanted to say it back, wanted to tell him that she'd been falling in love with him since that first patient knock at her door, but the words felt too big, too dangerous still. "You must be exhausted," she said instead. "You were up all night with the Garrison boy." "He'll recover fully," Matthew said, accepting her deflection. "And yes, I should rest. But I don't want to leave you alone." "I won't be alone," Clara said, and realized it was true. "Sarah will come soon, and probably Mrs. Chen, and once word spreads about the federal marshal, I expect I'll have more visitors than I know what to do with." She was right. Within an hour of Matthew's departure, Sarah arrived with a basket of food and a fierce expression. "I heard everything," she said, pulling Clara into a tight embrace. "Oh, my dear, brave friend, I'm so proud of you." Clara let herself be held, let herself accept the comfort she'd been denied for so long. "I'm scared," she admitted against Sarah's shoulder. "What if the marshal doesn't believe me? What if Jeremiah convinces them I'm lying?" "He won't," Sarah said firmly. "Not with Matthew's medical documentation of your injuries, not with the sheriff's testimony, not with the whole town finally ready to speak up." As the day progressed, more people came. Mrs. Chen brought tea and quiet solidarity. The pastor's wife offered prayers and practical support. Even people who'd never spoken to Clara before stopped by to express their outrage that such things had been happening in their community. "We should have done something sooner," Mrs. Patterson said, tears in her eyes. "We all knew and we did nothing. Can you forgive us?" Clara didn't know how to answer that. Their silence had enabled Jeremiah's violence, but she understood their fear. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and the law had seemed to be on his side. "What matters is that you're doing something now," she said finally. That night, Clara didn't sleep in the cabin. Sarah and Thomas insisted she stay at their ranch, and she was too emotionally exhausted to argue. She lay in their guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to process how much her life had changed in a single day. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. Clara stayed at the Garrett Ranch, returning to her cabin only during daylight hours, and always with someone accompanying her. The sheriff or his deputies checked on her regularly. Matthew visited daily, bringing medical supplies and quiet support. On the 4th day, Cole appeared at the ranch. Clara was helping Sarah with laundry when they heard horses approaching. Thomas emerged from the barn with his rifle, but Cole raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he called out. "Just got a message for Clara." "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of all of us," Thomas replied, not lowering his weapon. Cole dismounted slowly, his usual swagger replaced by something more subdued. He pulled out a crumpled telegram and held it out. "From Jeremiah. Came to the telegraph office, but they wouldn't deliver it to her direct, so they gave it to me." Sarah took the telegram and handed it to Clara, who read it with shaking hands. "Know everything. Coming home. You belong to me. No law changes that. Jay." "When?" Clara asked, surprised her voice remained steady. "Tomorrow, maybe day after," Cole said. He left the drive early. Garrison fired him when they found out about the skimming. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Look, I know you think I'm your enemy, but I'm not looking to get caught up in federal charges. What Jeremiah's been doing, I knew it was wrong. We all did. But he's dangerous when crossed, and we were cowards. And now, Thomas asked, now the marshal's coming, and I'd rather be on the right side of federal law. Cole looked directly at Clara. I'll testify if needed, about what I've seen, what he's said. I'm not proud of my part in this, but I won't lie for him anymore. After Cole left, Clara stood in the yard, the telegram crumpled in her fist. Tomorrow. Jeremiah would be back tomorrow, and everything would come to a head. We need to prepare, Thomas said, already thinking strategically. I'll talk to the sheriff, make sure he has men ready. I'll stay with you, Sarah said to Clara. You won't face him alone. But Clara shook her head. I need to be at the cabin when he arrives. It's my home, my ground. I won't let him drive me from it. They argued, but Clara was firm. This confrontation had been building for 7 years. She would face it on her terms in her space, as the woman she'd become, rather than the girl he'd broken. That evening, Matthew arrived at the ranch with news. The federal marshal will be here tomorrow afternoon. Sheriff Mills received confirmation. The timing was almost too perfect. Jeremiah would arrive to find his world completely changed, his power stripped away, his victim transformed into his accuser. I want to be there, Matthew said. When he comes. No, Clara said immediately. You're the one he'll target first. The outsider who corrupted his sister turned her against him. I won't have your blood on my hands. And I won't have yours on mine, Matthew countered. Clara, please, let me stand with you. They compromised. Matthew would wait at the sheriff's office with Mills and his deputies ready to respond, but not immediately present. Thomas would position himself within earshot of the cabin. Sarah would stay with Mrs. Chen ready to provide support after whatever happened. That night, Clara returned to her cabin alone despite everyone's protests. She needed to prepare not just physically, but mentally. She cleaned her rifle, loaded it, placed it within easy reach. She packed a small bag with essentials in case she needed to flee quickly. She hid her saved money in multiple places, ensuring Jeremiah couldn't destroy everything if he got past her defenses. Then she put on her mother's ring, the one piece of jewelry Jeremiah had never found hidden beneath loose floorboards for 7 years. It was simple, just a gold band with a small sapphire, but wearing it made her feel connected to the woman who'd raised her to be strong, who'd never known what her son would become. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the table where she'd served Jeremiah thousands of meals, where she'd been backhanded for imagined slights, where she'd learned to make herself small and silent. But now she sat tall, straight, unafraid. The broken ribs had healed. The bruises had faded. What remained was stronger than what had been damaged. Dawn came slowly, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Clara made coffee, ate breakfast. Went through the normal motions of morning while her nerves sang with anticipation. She could feel it in the air, change coming like a storm, inevitable and transformative. It was just past noon when she heard the horse approaching. A single rider moving fast but not frantically. Clara stood rifle in hand and stepped onto the porch. Jeremiah looked different after 3 months on the trail. Leaner, harder, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were the same dark, possessive, furious. He dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. Sister, he said, the word dripping with mockery. I hear you've been busy. Jeremiah, Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. You're back early. Garrison didn't appreciate my management style. His eyes tracked over her, noting the rifle, the straight spine, the lack of fear. You've changed. I've healed. Have you... He took a step closer and Clara raised the rifle slightly. He stopped, his expression shifting from anger to something more dangerous, calculation. You won't shoot me. Won't I? I'm your brother, your family. Everything you have is because of me. Everything I don't have is because of you, Clara corrected. My freedom, my dignity, my safety, all sacrificed to your need for control. Jeremiah's face darkened. Control, I protected you, fed you, kept a roof over your head. You broke my ribs, burned my books, drove away anyone who showed me kindness because you needed to learn. The shout exploded from him, 7 years of justification and rage condensed into 4 words. You were weak, useless, just like Mother always said. Someone had to make you strong. Mother never said that, Clara said quietly. She loved me. She would be horrified by what you've become. The words hit their mark. Jeremiah's hand moved to his pistol, but Clara was ready, the rifle aimed steady at his chest. Draw it, and I shoot, she said calmly. I'm done being your victim, Jeremiah. It ends today. You think that doctor will protect you, that these people who suddenly care will stand by you when things get hard? Jeremiah laughed ugly and bitter. They'll abandon you the moment it becomes inconvenient. I'm the only one who'll always be here. No, Clara said. You're the only one who'll always try to break me. But I'm not broken anymore. I'm not your property. I'm not your responsibility. I'm my own person, and I choose to be free of you. Jeremiah's face contorted with rage. You belong to me. You've always belonged to me. Ever since Mother and Father died, you've been mine to protect, mine to discipline, mine to torture, Clara interrupted. To beat, to imprison. That's not protection, Jeremiah. That's abuse, and it's also illegal. Something in her tone must have warned him, because his expression shifted from rage to wariness. What have you done? I've told the truth. To the sheriff, to the federal marshal, who will be here any moment, to everyone who would listen. 7 years of truth, all documented, all verified. You lying bitch! He started forward and Clara fired. The bullet hit the ground at his feet, stopping him cold. The sound echoed across the valley, and immediately there were responding sounds. Horses approaching, fast voices calling out. The next one won't be a warning, Clara said, chambering another round with steady hands. Sheriff Mills appeared first, riding hard with 2 deputies. Behind them, Clara could see Matthew and Thomas approaching. Jeremiah spun to face them, his hand on his pistol, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. Jeremiah Hendricks, the sheriff called out. You're under arrest for assault, false imprisonment, and theft from the Garrison Ranch. You can't arrest me for disciplining my own sister. I can and I will, and when the federal marshal arrives, you'll face additional charges. The sheriff dismounted, his own weapon drawn. Now drop your gun and come quietly, or things get worse for you. For a moment, Clara thought Jeremiah would fight. She could see it in his eyes, the calculation of whether it was better to die than submit. But then his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as he realized he'd lost. He dropped his pistol and allowed the deputies to restrain him. As they led him away, he looked back at Clara. This isn't over, he said. You're still my sister, my blood. You can't escape that. Watch me, Clara replied. After they were gone, after the dust had settled and the shock had worn off, Clara found herself surrounded by the people who'd stood by her. Matthew held her as she shook with released tension. Sarah wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Thomas stood guard, making sure Jeremiah was truly gone. You did it? Matthew murmured against her hair. You stood up to him. We did it, Clara corrected. All of us. The federal marshal arrived 3 hours later, a stern woman named Margaret Hayes, who took Clara's statement with professional efficiency and personal compassion. What you've endured is unconscionable, Marshal Hayes said when Clara finished. Your brother will face federal charges for involuntary servitude and violation of your civil rights. With the evidence we have, he's looking at significant prison time. Will I have to testify? Most likely. Are you prepared for that? Clara thought of standing in a courtroom telling her story to strangers facing Jeremiah across a legal battlefield. The prospect terrified her, but less than the thought of him going free. I'm prepared, she said. That night, for the first time in 7 years, Clara slept in her cabin without fear. The space felt different now. Not a prison, but a home. Not a place of violence, but a place where she'd found her strength. She'd stood her ground, faced her abuser, and won. But winning, she discovered, wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The next weeks passed in a blur of legal procedures. Jeremiah was transferred to federal custody in Denver to await trial. Clara gave multiple statements, each retelling of her story a little easier, a little less painful. The town rallied around her in ways she'd never expected, as if her courage had given them permission to acknowledge what they'd all known but ignored. Matthew was a constant presence, patient and supportive, but careful not to pressure her. He understood that she needed time to discover who she was without violence defining her days. "I don't know how to be normal," she confessed one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "There's no such thing as normal," Matthew replied. "There's just people doing their best with what they've been given. You've been given a hard path, but you're walking it with more grace than anyone could expect." "I shot at him," Clara said, still somewhat amazed by her own actions. "I fired a gun at my own brother." "You fired a warning shot at a man who tortured you for 7 years. The fact that you didn't kill him shows remarkable restraint." Clara thought about that moment, the clarity she'd felt, the absolute certainty that she would kill Jeremiah if necessary to protect herself. It should have horrified her, but it didn't. It felt like power, like taking back control of her own life. A month after Jeremiah's arrest, Clara received a letter from Denver. Not from Jeremiah. He wasn't allowed to contact her, but from a lawyer representing him. "Your brother wishes to negotiate," the letter read. "He's willing to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for your agreement not to testify." Clara read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Matthew. "He's trying to control the situation even from jail." "What do you want to do?" Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed her transformation. "I want to testify. I want to stand in that courtroom and tell the truth. Not for revenge, but for justice. For closure. For every woman who's been told she belongs to someone else." Matthew came to stand beside her. "Then that's what you'll do, and I'll be there with you. You don't have to—" "I want to. Clara, I've watched you become yourself these past months. It's been a privilege and an honor. Let me continue to witness your strength." Clara turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the love he'd declared at the dance, steady and patient and real. "I love you," she said, the words finally breaking free. "I didn't know I could still love, but I do. I love you." Matthew's kiss was gentle, careful, as if she might break. But Clara wasn't fragile anymore. She was strong, forged in fire, and choosing tenderness anyway. She kissed him back with all the passion she'd thought had been beaten out of her, all the hope she'd thought was dead. When they finally parted, both breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not now, not until you're ready, but someday. Let me be your family, the kind that protects without imprisoning, that loves without conditions." "Yes," Clara said, surprising herself with the immediacy of her answer. "Yes, but not yet. First, I need to finish this. I need to face him one last time and close that chapter of my life." The trial was set for 3 months hence. Clara used the time to prepare not just legally, but emotionally. She worked with Marshall Hayes on her testimony. She read law books Matthew brought her, understanding her rights for the first time. She tended her garden, rebuilding what had been destroyed, making it better than before. The community embraced her fully now. She taught at the school regularly, her gentle patience making her a favorite among the children. She helped with church functions, her voice returning to the choir, stronger than ever. She was no longer Jeremiah's sister, that poor broken girl. She was Clara Hendricks' teacher, neighbor, survivor. 2 weeks before the trial, another telegram arrived. This one was from the federal prosecutor. Jeremiah had agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a specific sentence, 10 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release for 5 years. "It's a good deal," Marshall Hayes explained when she arrived to discuss it. "With a trial, he might get more time, but he might also get less if the jury feels sympathetic. This guarantees he'll be gone for at least 5 years, probably the full 10. Clara considered it. Part of her wanted her day in court, wanted to speak her truth to the world. But another part, the pragmatic part that had learned to survive, recognized that this was victory enough. "I'll agree on one condition," she said. "I want to speak at his sentencing. I want him to hear from my own mouth what he did to me and what I've become despite him." The condition was accepted. 2 weeks later, Clara stood in a federal courtroom in Denver. Matthew and the Garretts behind her facing Jeremiah for what she knew would be the last time. He looked smaller in prison clothes, his power stripped away along with his freedom. When he saw her, his expression cycled through emotions, anger, disbelief, and something that might have been regret. "Miss Hendricks," the judge said, "you may speak." Clara stood her prepared statement in her hand, but she didn't need it. The words came from her heart, clear and strong. "For 7 years you told me I was broken," she said, looking directly at Jeremiah. "You broke my ribs, my spirit, my connection to the world. You said it was for my own good, that you were making me strong. But strength isn't born from violence. It's born from surviving it, from choosing to heal, from refusing to let cruelty make you cruel. You were my brother. You were supposed to protect me. Instead, you became the thing I needed protection from. You took our parents' death and used it as an excuse to control me, to own me, to destroy me piece by piece. But here's what you never understood. You can't destroy something that refuses to be destroyed. Every bone you broke healed. Every bruise faded. Every cruel word became fuel for my determination to be free. I pity you, Jeremiah. You're in prison now, but you've been in a prison of your own making for years, a prison of rage and control and the inability to love without possessing. I hope these 10 years give you time to reflect, to change, to become the man our parents would have wanted you to be. As for me, I'm free. Free to love, to laugh, to live without fear. Free to forgive you not for your sake, but for mine, because holding on to hatred would just be another kind of prison. You said I belonged to you. You were wrong. I belong to myself. I always have. It just took me a while to remember it." She sat down, her heart pounding, but her conscience clear. Jeremiah tried to speak, but his lawyer stopped him. The judge pronounced the sentence 10 years as agreed, and then it was over. As they led Jeremiah away, he looked back one last time. Clara met his gaze steadily. No longer the frightened girl he'd terrorized, but a woman who'd found her strength in the ruins of what he'd tried to break. Outside the courthouse, Clara stood in the Denver sunshine, breathing free air, surrounded by people who loved her without conditions. Matthew took her hand and she squeezed it, grounding herself in this new reality. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. Clara considered the question. How did she feel free? Yes. Relieved, certainly. But also something else, something she hadn't expected. "Whole," she said finally. "For the first time in 7 years, I feel whole." The journey back from Denver took 3 days, and with each mile that passed, Clara felt herself returning not just to her geographical home, but to a sense of self she was still discovering. Matthew rode beside her in the stagecoach, his presence steady and undemanding, while Sarah and Thomas followed in their wagon with supplies they'd purchased in the city. The mountains rose around them like old friends welcoming her back, and Clara found herself seeing them with new eyes, not as walls that trapped her, but as guardians that had witnessed her transformation. "You're quiet," Matthew observed on the second day as the coach rumbled through a particularly scenic valley. "I'm thinking," Clara replied, watching an eagle circle overhead. "For 7 years, my life was about surviving Jeremiah. Now that he's gone, I don't know what it's about anymore." "Maybe that's the gift," Matthew suggested. "You get to decide." The words stayed with her as they completed their journey, echoing in her mind as she stepped down from the coach in front of the boarding house. The town looked the same but felt different, or perhaps she was the one who had changed. People who had once averted their eyes now nodded in greeting. Men tipped their hats with respect rather than pity. Women smiled with genuine warmth rather than uncomfortable sympathy. "Clara." Mrs. Chen hurried from the general store, her face bright with relief. "You're back. How did it go?" Word of the sentencing spread quickly, and soon Clara found herself surrounded by townspeople eager to hear about the trial, about Denver, about her plans now that she was truly free. The attention was overwhelming after years of forced invisibility, but also strangely healing. These people were really seeing her as herself, rather than as Jeremiah's broken sister. That evening, Clara returned to her cabin alone, despite offers from the Garretts to stay with them. She needed to reclaim the space completely to make it hers in a way it had never been before. The cabin was exactly as she'd left it, but like everything else, it felt different now. The shadows were just shadows, not hiding places for potential violence. The creaking boards were just the settling of old wood, not warning signs of Jeremiah's approach. She lit every lamp, filling the space with warm light, and began the process of transformation. Jeremiah's chair, the one she'd never been allowed to sit in, she dragged outside. His clothes still hanging in the bedroom she'd been forbidden from entering, she packed into boxes for donation. His books, the few he had allowed to remain, she moved to make room for her own growing collection. As she worked, she found things she'd forgotten about. a photograph of their parents hidden behind another frame. Her mother's recipe box shoved beneath old linens. A small wooden horse her father had carved for her 8th birthday, somehow surviving Jeremiah's rages by being overlooked in a dusty corner. Each recovered item felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Fragments of the girl she'd been before violence became her daily bread. She arranged them carefully throughout the cabin, the photograph on the mantel, the recipe box in the kitchen, the wooden horse on the windowsill where it could catch the morning light. Matthew arrived as the sun was setting, bringing dinner from the boarding house and a bottle of wine to celebrate. They ate at the table where she'd served Jeremiah countless meals in silence, but now it was filled with conversation and laughter. Matthew told her about his plans to expand his practice, maybe take on an apprentice. Clara shared her thoughts about teaching, about maybe writing down her mother's recipes before she forgot them completely. "The school board wants to offer you a permanent position," Matthew said as they cleared the dishes. "Mrs. Patterson told me they were impressed with how you handled the children during your volunteer work." Clara's hand stilled. A permanent position, a real job with wages and respect and purpose beyond mere survival. "I don't have any formal training. You can read, write, and do arithmetic better than most. You're patient and kind. The children adore you." Matthew took her hand, still rough from years of hard work, but healing like the rest of her. "You're more than qualified." That night, after Matthew left with a gentle kiss and a promise to return tomorrow, Clara sat at the table with paper and pen. She wrote a letter accepting the school board's offer, then another to a cousin back east she hadn't been allowed to contact for 7 years. She wrote until her hand cramped, pouring out words that had been trapped inside her for so long. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Cole stood at her door, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Miss Hendricks," he said formally, "I wanted to apologize, properly, for my part in all of it." Clara studied him, this man who had threatened and leered and enabled Jeremiah's control. Part of her wanted to slam the door in his face, but another part recognized something in his expression. Genuine remorse, maybe even growth. "Come in," she said finally. "I'll make coffee." They sat awkwardly at first, the weight of history between them. But as Cole began to talk, Clara understood that he too had been shaped by violence, though in different ways. "My old man was like Jeremiah," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "Ruled with his fists, taught us that's how men were supposed to be. When I saw what your brother was doing, it seemed normal, natural even. It wasn't until you stood up to him, until I saw you could fight back, that I realized how wrong it all was." "And now," Clara asked, "now I'm trying to be different. Got myself a job at the Garrison Ranch, honest work, stopped drinking so much. Even started courting Amy Williams proper-like with her father's permission and everything." He met her eyes. "I know I can't undo what I did, the fear I caused, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better." After he left, Clara stood in her doorway, pondering the strange turns life could take. If someone like Cole could change, could choose to be better, then perhaps there was hope for everyone. Even she thought with a pang for Jeremiah somewhere in his federal cell. The first day of school came faster than expected. Clara dressed carefully in a new dress she'd made herself professional, but not severe in a green that Sarah said brought out her eyes. She pinned her hair in a style that suggested authority while remaining approachable. Looking in the mirror, she saw a teacher, a professional woman, someone with purpose beyond survival. The schoolhouse was a single room with windows that let in streams of morning light. 23 children aged 6 to 14 sat at worn desks, their faces ranging from eager to skeptical. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she wrote her name on the board, but her voice was steady when she turned to face them. "Good morning, I'm Miss Hendricks, and I'll be your teacher." Tommy Morrison's hand shot up immediately. "Miss Clara, are you going to teach us songs like you promised?" "Miss Hendricks," she corrected gently, though she smiled at his enthusiasm. "And yes, we'll have time for songs, but first we have lessons." Teaching, Clara discovered, was like finding a part of herself she hadn't known existed. She had patience, she'd never been allowed to develop creativity that had been suppressed for years, and a genuine joy in watching understanding dawn on young faces. The children, some of whom had witnessed her transformation from victim to survivor, treated her with a mixture of respect and affection that warmed her heart. There were challenges, of course. Billy Patterson, 13 and full of adolescent rebellion, tested her authority constantly in the first weeks. But Clara had faced down worse than a stubborn teenager, and she met his challenges with calm consistency that eventually won him over. "You're different from Mr. Henderson," Billy told her one day after school, referring to the previous teacher who'd left for better opportunities in California. "Different how ye?" Clara asked, cleaning the board. "You don't yell. Even when we're being awful, you don't yell. You just get this look like you're disappointed, but you know we can do better." Clara thought about all the yelling she'd endured, how it had never made her better, only more afraid. "Yelling doesn't teach anything except fear," she said, "and fear isn't a good foundation for learning." Her relationship with Matthew deepened as autumn progressed toward winter. He courted her properly officially, with the whole town watching and mostly approving. They attended church together, took walks along the river, shared dinners at the boarding house, where Mrs. Patterson beamed at them like a proud mother. But it wasn't all easy. Clara still flinched at sudden movements, still felt panic rise when voices were raised in anger, even when it had nothing to do with her. Some nights she woke gasping from nightmares where Jeremiah had returned, where the trial had been a dream, where she was trapped again in that cycle of violence. Matthew was patient with her healing, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. When she finally invited him to stay the night 2 months after the trial, it was her choice, her decision, her desire that guided them. His touch was gentle, reverent, so different from the violence she'd known that she wept afterward, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that this too was something Jeremiah hadn't been able to destroy. "Are you all right?" Matthew asked, holding her close concern evident in his voice. "I'm more than all right," Clara assured him. "I'm learning that my body can feel pleasure, not just pain. That touch can be gentle, that I can want and be wanted without fear." Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the valley in snow that made everything clean and new. Clara stood at the schoolhouse window one December morning, watching her students arrive bundled in coats and scarves, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. She was reviewing the day's lessons when she heard a commotion outside. A stranger had arrived in town, his horse nearly dead from hard riding. Clara recognized the type immediately, a bounty hunter or law enforcement of some kind, with that particular blend of weariness and vigilance that came from chasing dangerous men. Sheriff Mills met him in the street, and their conversation, though too distant to hear, was clearly serious. The stranger gestured urgently, and Mills's expression grew grim. They both looked toward the schoolhouse, and Clara's blood ran cold. "Children," she said, keeping her voice calm. "We're going to practice our emergency drill, everyone under their desks, quiet as mice." The children, well trained from previous drills she'd insisted on, immediately complied. Clara grabbed the rifle she kept hidden behind the bookshelf, a precaution she'd hoped never to need, and moved to the window. The stranger and Sheriff Mills were approaching the schoolhouse now, but their body language had changed. Mills held up his hands in a calming gesture, and Clara realized they weren't coming as threats, but as bearers of news. She met them at the door, rifle visible, but not raised. "Sheriff, what's happening?" "Miss Hendricks, this is Deputy Marshal Carson. There's been an incident at the federal prison." Clara's heart stopped. "Jeremiah. He escaped," Carson said bluntly. 3 days ago. Killed a guard in the process. We have reason to believe he's heading this way." The world seemed to tilt. Clara gripped the doorframe to steady herself, her mind racing. Jeremiah was free. Jeremiah was coming. Everything she'd built, everything she'd become, was suddenly under threat again. "The children," she said, her teacher's instincts overriding her personal fear. "We're posting guards," Mills assured her. "But you need to dismiss school, get everyone home safe." Clara turned back to her classroom, where 23 pairs of eyes peered out from under desks. "Everyone up," she said, proud of how steady her voice remained. "School is dismissed early today due to the weather. Gather your things quickly and quietly." The parents arrived within minutes, word spreading through the town like wildfire. They collected their children with frightened efficiency, many of the mothers hugging Clara as if she might disappear. "You come stay with us," Mrs. Chen insisted. "Our house has good locks. My husband has guns." But Clara shook her head. "I need to go home. If he's coming for me, I want to be ready." Matthew arrived as she was locking the schoolhouse, his face white with fear and fury. "I just heard. Clara, you can't—" "I can and I will," she interrupted. "I won't run from him. Not again. Not ever." They argued all the way back to her cabin, Matthew insisting she stay with him, or the Garretts, or anywhere but alone, Clara maintaining that she needed to face this on her ground, on her terms. "He killed a guard," Matthew said desperately.
"He's not the same man who left here. Prison has made him worse, more dangerous." "Or more desperate," Clara countered. She touched Matthew's face gently. "I'm not the same woman he left either. I'm stronger, smarter, and I'm not alone. But I need to do this my way." Sarah and Thomas arrived with supplies and weapons, turning Clara's cabin into a small fortress. They boarded windows, set up watch positions, established signals and fallback plans. Sheriff Mills posted 2 deputies nearby, and Marshal Carson set up his own surveillance from the ridge. As night fell, Clara sat in her fortified cabin rifle across her lap waiting. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from broken ribs to breaking free from victim to survivor to protector of children. She'd built a real life in Jeremiah's absence. She wouldn't let him take it away again. The first night passed without incident. The second as well. By the third night, nerves were fraying. Some began to wonder if Jeremiah had fled elsewhere if the threat had passed. But Clara knew better. She knew her brother's patience, his cruelty, his need for control. He would come when they least expected it, when guards were tired and vigilance had waned. It was just after midnight on the 4th night when she heard a sound that didn't belong, a footstep, where there should be only wind. Clara rose silently, her body remembering years of moving quietly to avoid violence, but now using that skill for defense rather than submission. She peered through a crack in the boarded window and saw him. Jeremiah stood at the edge of her property, thinner than before, his face gaunt from prison life and hard travel. But his eyes were the same dark, possessive, burning with the rage of someone who'd had his property taken away. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, rough-looking characters he must have recruited with promises of money or violence. Clara's heart raced, but her hands remained steady as she checked her rifle, her pistol, the knife she'd hidden in her boot. A deputy's whistle pierced the night, the alarm signal. Immediately, lights appeared in nearby windows. The town was waking, responding, coming to her aid. But Jeremiah was already moving, charging toward the cabin with his companions, firing at the deputy's position. Clara positioned herself behind the overturned table she'd prepared as cover. When Jeremiah kicked in her door, the same door he'd walked through thousands of times as her tormentor, she was ready. "Hello, brother," she said, her rifle trained on his chest. He stopped his own weapon, raised his companion, spreading out to flank her. "Clara, my dear broken sister, did you think prison walls could keep me from what's mine?" "I'm not yours," Clara said simply. "I never was. You testified against me, your own blood. You stood in that courtroom and betrayed everything our parents taught us about family loyalty. Our parents taught us to love each other, not to own each other. You betrayed that the first time you raised your hand to me." Jeremiah's face contorted. "I made you strong. No, I made me strong. In spite of you, not because of you." The standoff stretched taut, 4 guns, pointed fingers on triggers. Clara could hear shouts outside, Matthew's voice among them, but she didn't dare look away from Jeremiah. "You're going to drop your weapons and come with me," Jeremiah said. "We're leaving this place, starting over somewhere new where no one knows us, where I can remind you of your place." "The only place I'm going," Clara said, "is forward, without you." One of Jeremiah's companions shifted nervously. "This ain't what you said, Hendricks. You said grab the girl and go. You didn't mention nothing about her being armed and the whole town coming down on us." "Shut up," Jeremiah snarled, but Clara could see the doubt creeping into his men's faces. They were criminals, but not stupid ones. The sound of multiple horses approaching, of armed townspeople surrounding the cabin, was making them reconsider. "You hear that?" Clara asked them. "That's the sound of a community that won't let him hurt me again. You can die with him, or you can surrender now and maybe live." The man on Jeremiah's left lowered his gun slightly. "I ain't dying for someone else's family quarrel." "Don't you dare!" Jeremiah started, but his words were cut off by the cabin door exploding inward. Matthew burst through, followed by Thomas and 2 deputies. The sudden intrusion broke the standoff spell.
Jeremiah's companion on the left dropped his weapon and raised his hands. The one on the right tried to run but was tackled by a deputy. Jeremiah, seeing his support crumble, did the only thing his nature allowed. He charged at Clara with a roar of rage, his gun forgot in his hands, reaching for her throat, just as they had so many times before. But Clara was ready. She sidestepped his charge, using his momentum against him, and brought the rifle butt down hard on his back. He crashed to the floor, and before he could rise, she had her boot on his neck and her rifle pointed at his head. "My ribs are already broken," she said, echoing words from months ago. "But they healed. Everything you broke healed, and now I'm the one standing while you're on the floor." Sheriff Mills and Marshal Carson entered, taking in the scene with professional assessment. Carson nodded to Clara with clear respect. "Well done, Miss Hendricks." As they hauled Jeremiah to his feet, he looked at Clara with something she'd never seen in his eyes before: fear. He was afraid of her, of what she'd become, of the strength he'd never managed to destroy. This time, Marshal Carson told him, "You're going to a different kind of prison. Supermax, no escape, no hope of early release. You killed a federal officer. You're done." As they dragged him away, Jeremiah called out one last time, "You're still my sister, my blood." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I'm your sister by birth, not by choice. But I choose who my family is now, and you're not part of it." After they were gone, after the chaos had settled and statements had been given, Clara found herself surrounded by the people who'd come to her aid. Matthew held her close, Sarah fussed over a minor cut on her hand. Thomas praised her tactical thinking. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out to protect her. "You all came," Clara said, overwhelmed by the show of support. "Of course we did," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You're one of us. We protect our own." As dawn broke over the mountains, painting them in shades of gold and pink, Clara stood on her porch, watching the sun rise on a new day. Jeremiah was gone. Truly gone this time, heading for a prison he'd never escape. The threat that had defined her life for so long had finally been defeated. "What now?" Matthew asked, coming to stand beside her. Clara considered the question. What now, indeed? She was free, completely free to be whoever she wanted to be. The thought was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. "Now," she said, "I teach school. I tend my garden. I love you. I live without fear." She turned to face him. "I believe you asked me to marry you once. Does that offer still stand?" Matthew's face lit up. "Always." "Then yes, I'll marry you. We'll build a life together, a family based on love, not control. We'll be everything Jeremiah said was impossible." They were married a month later in the church where Clara had first begun to reclaim her life. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, and carried wildflowers from the mountain meadows. The entire town attended, celebrating not just a union, but a triumph of spirit over violence of community, over isolation of love, over possession. As Clara walked down the aisle, she thought about broken ribs and how they heal stronger at the break point. She thought about her parents who would have been proud of the woman she'd become. She thought about Jeremiah locked away where he could never hurt anyone again, and felt not hatred but pity for the life he'd chosen. But mostly she thought about the future stretching ahead of her, full of possibility and promise. She was Clara Hendricks, soon to be Clara Sinclair, teacher, wife, survivor, thriver. She had been broken, but she had not stayed broken. She had been a victim, but she had not remained one. As she reached Matthew at the altar, as she spoke vows of love and partnership and equality, Clara felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She was free, truly free, and that freedom had been earned through courage, community, and the unbreakable strength of a spirit that refused to be destroyed. The reception was held at the Garrett Ranch with dancing and laughter that went late into the night. Clara danced with her husband, with Thomas, with Sheriff Mills, even with Cole, who had continued his path of redemption. She sang the songs her mother had taught her, her voice strong and clear, no longer silenced by fear. "You're radiant," Sarah told her, pulling her aside for a moment. "You're glowing with happiness." "I never thought I could be this happy," Clara admitted. "I thought Jeremiah had broken that part of me permanently." "He never had that power," Sarah said firmly. "He could hurt your body, control your movements, but he could never touch the core of who you are. That belonged to you alone always." As the evening wound down and Clara and Matthew prepared to leave for their wedding night at the boarding house's best room, the townspeople gathered to see them off. These people who had once watched her suffering in silence now celebrated her joy openly. They had all been part of her journey from broken to whole, from captive to free. "Thank you," Clara called out to them, "all of you, for seeing me, for standing with me, for helping me become who I was meant to be." The crowd cheered as Matthew helped her into the wagon, and as they drove away, Clara looked back at the assembled faces, her true family chosen and cherished. Then she looked forward toward the mountains and the stars and the future she would build with her own hands. Her ribs had been broken, yes, but like bones that heal stronger at the breakpoint, she had emerged from her trials more powerful than before. She was Clara Sinclair now, unbreakable and free, ready to face whatever came next with courage, grace, and the hard-won knowledge that she could survive anything and still choose love. The wagon rolled on through the night, carrying her toward tomorrow, toward hope, toward a life that was finally, truly, completely her own.